Chapter 4 Medical Inquiries and Observations, Volume 2, Part 47. The exciting causes of the gout are frequently a greater degree or a sudden application of its remote and predisposing causes. They act upon the accumulated excitability of the system, and by destroying its equilibrium of excitement and regular order actions, produce convulsion or irregular morbid and local excitement. These exciting causes are either a stimulating or of a sedative nature. The former are violent exercise of body or mind, night watching, and even sitting up late at night, a hearty meal, a fit of drunkenness, a few glasses of claret or a draught of cider, where those liquors have not been habitual to the patient, a sudden paroxysm of joy, anger, or terror, a dislocation of a bone, straining of a joint, particularly of the ankle, undue pressure upon the foot or leg from a tight shoe or boot and irritated corn, and the usual remote causes of fever. The latter exciting causes are sudden inanition from bleeding, purging, vomiting, fasting, cold, a sudden stoppage of moisture on the feet, fear, grief, excess in venery, and the debility left upon the system by the crisis of a fever. All these causes act more certainly when they are aided by the additional debility induced upon the system in sleep. It is for this reason that the gout generally makes its first attack in the night, and in a part of the system most remote from the energy of the brain, and most debilitated by exercise, viz., in the great toe, or in some part of the foot. In ascribing a fit of the gout to a cause which is of a sedative nature, the reader will not suppose that I have departed simplicity and uniformity of a proposition I have elsewhere delivered. That disease is the effect of stimulus. The abstraction of a natural and habitual impression of any kind, by increasing the force of those which remain, renders the production of morbid and excessive actions in the system as much the effect of preternatural or disproportioned stimulus, as if they were induced by causes that are externally and evidently stimulating. It is thus in many other of the operations of nature, opposite causes produce the same effects. 8. The gout consists simply in morbid excitement accompanied with irregular action, or the absence of all action from the force of stimulus. There is nothing specific in the morbid excitement and actions which take place in the gout different from what occur in fevers. It is to be lamented that a kind of metastasis of error has taken place in pathology. The rejection of a specific acrimony as the cause of each disease has unfortunately been followed by a belief in as many specific actions as there are different forms and grades of disease, and thus perpetuated the evils of our ancient systems of medicine. However varied morbid actions may be by their causes, seats, and effects, they are all of the same nature, and the time will probably come when the whole nomenclature of morbid actions will be absorbed in the single name of disease. I shall now briefly enumerate the symptoms of the gout, as they appear in the ligaments, the blood vessels, the viscera, the nervous system, the alimentary canal, the lymphatics, the skin, and the bones of the human body. And here ye shall find that it is an epitome of all disease. The ligaments which connect the bones are the seats of what is called a legitimate or true gout. They are affected with pain, swelling, and inflammation. The pain is sometimes so acute as to be compared to the gnawing of a dog. We perceive here the sameness of the gout with the rheumatism. Many pages, and indeed whole essays, have been composed by writers to distinguish them, but they are exactly the same disease, while the morbid actions are confined to this part of the body. They are, it is true, produced by different remote causes, but this constitutes no more difference in their nature than is produced in a coal of fire, whether it be inflamed by a candle or by a spark of electricity. The morbid actions which are induced by the usual causes of rheumatism affect, though less frequently, the lungs, the trachea, the head, the bowels, and even the heart, as well as the gout. Those actions, moreover, are the means of a fluid being effused, which is changed into calcareous matter in the joints and other parts of the body, exactly like that which is produced by the gout. They likewise twist and dislocate the bones in common with the gout in a manner to be described hereafter. The only difference between what are called gouty and rheumatic actions consists in their seats and in the degrees of their force. The debility which predisposes to the gout being greater and more extensively diffused through the body, than the debility which precedes rheumatism, the morbid actions. In the former case, pass more readily from external to internal parts, and produce in both more acute and more dangerous effects. A simile derived from the difference in the degrees of action produced in the system by Marsh Miasmata, made use of upon a former occasion, will serve me again to illustrate this part of our subject. A mild remittent and a yellow fever are different grades of the same disease. The former, like the rheumatism, affects the bones chiefly with pain, while the latter, like the gout, affects not only the bones, but the stomach, bowels, brain nerves, lymphatics, and all the internal parts of the body. In the arterial system, the gout produces fever. This fever appears not only in the increased force or frequency of the pulse, but in morbid affections of all the viscera. It puts on all the different grades of fever, from the malignity of the plague to the mildness of a common intermittent. It has, moreover, its regular exacerbations and remissions once in every 24 hours, and its crisis usually on the 14th day in violent cases. In moderate attacks, it runs on from 20 to 40 days, in common with the typhus or slow chronic state of fever. It is common for those persons who consider the gout as a specific disease, when it appears in the above forms, to say that it is complicated with fever, but this is an error, for there can exist but one morbid action in the blood vessels at once. And the same laws are imposed upon the morbid actions excited in those parts of the body by the remote causes of the gout. As by the common causes of fever, I have seen 2 instances of this disease appearing in the form of a genuine hectic, and one in which it appeared to yield to lunar influence in the manner described by Dr. Balfour. In the highly inflammatory state of the gout, the sensibility of the blood vessels far exceeds what is seen in the same state of fever from more common causes. I held an instance in which a translation of the gouty action to the eye produced such an exquisite degree of sensibility that the patient was unable to bear the feeble light which was emitted from a few coals of fire in his room. At a time, too, when the coldness of the weather would have made a large fire agreeable to them. It is from the extreme sensibility which the gout imparts to the stomach that the bark is so generally rejected by it. I knew a British officer who had nearly died from taking a spoonful of the infusion of that medicine, while his arterial system was in this state of morbid excitability from a fit of the gout. It is remarkable that the gout is most disposed to assume a malignant character during the prevalence of an inflammatory constitution of the atmosphere. This has been long ago, remarked B.D. Dr. Huxham. Several instances of it have occurred in this city since the year 1793-3. The gout affects most of the viscera. In the brain, it produces headache, vertigo, coma, apoplexy, and palsy. In the lungs, it produces pneumonia vera, Nutha, asthma, hemoptysis, pulmonary consumption, and a short becking cough, first described by Dr. Sydenham. In the throat, it produces inflammatory angina. In the uterus, it produces hemorrhagia uterina. It affects the kidneys with inflammation, strangury, diabetes, and calculi. The position of the body for weeks or months on the back, by favoring the compression of the kidneys by the bowels, is the principal reason why those parts suffer so much in gouty people. The strangury appears to be produced by the same kind of engorgement or choking of the vessels of the kidneys, which takes place in the smallpox and yellow fever. 4 cases of it are described in the 3rd volume of the Physical and Literary Essays of Edinburgh by Dr. David Clerk. I have seen 1 instance of death in an old man from this cause. The catheter brought no water from his bladder. The late Mr. John Penn, formerly governor of Pennsylvania, I have been informed by one of his physicians, died from a similar affection in his kidneys from gout. The catheter was as ineffectual in giving him relief as it was in the case of my patient. The neck of the bladder sometimes becomes the seat of the gout. It discovers itself by spasm and a suppression of urine in some cases, and occasionally by a habitual discharge of mucus through the urethra. This disease has been called by Lutot a catarrh of the bladder. Dr. Stoll describes it and calls it hemorrhoids of the bladder. But of all the viscera, the liver suffers most from the gout. It produces in it inflammation, suppuration, melena, shearas, gallstones, jaundice, and a habitual increased secretion and excretion of the liver. These affections of the liver appear most frequently in southern countries and in female habits. They are substitutes for a gout in the ligaments and in the extremities of the body. They appear likewise in drunkards from ardent spirits. It would seem that certain stimuli act specifically upon the liver, probably for the wise purpose of discharging such parts of the blood from the body, as are vitiated by the rapidity of its circulation. I shall, in another place, take notice of the action of marsh miasmata upon the livers of men and beasts. It has been observed that hogs that live brewhouses and feed upon the fermented grains of barley always discover enlarged or diseased livers. But a determination of the blood to the liver and an increased action of its vessels are produced by other causes than marsh miasmata and fermented and distilled liquors. They appear in the fever which accompanies madness and the malignant sore throat, also in contusions of the brain, and in the excited state of the blood vessels, which is produced by anger and exercise. I have found an attention to these facts useful in prescribing for diseases of liver, inasmuch as they have led me from considering them as idiopathy C affections, but as the effects only of morbid actions excited in other parts of the body. The gout sometimes affects the arterial and nervous systems jointly, producing in the brain coma, vertigo, apoplexy, palsy, loss of memory, and madness, and in the nerves hysteria, hypochondriasis, and syncope. It is common to say that gout counterfeits all these diseases. But this is an inaccurate mode of speaking. All those diseases have but one cause, and they are exactly the same, however different the stimulus may be from which they are derived. Sometimes the gout affects the brain and nerves exclusively without producing the least morbid action in the blood vessels. I once attended a gentleman from Barbados who suffered from this affection of his brain and nerves, the most intolerable depression of spirits. It yielded to large doses of wine, but his relief was perfect and more durable when a pain was excited by nature or art in his hands or feet. The muscles are sometimes affected by the gout with spasm, with general and partial convulsions, and lastly with great pain. Dr. Stoll describes a case of opus totanos from it. The angina pectoris, or a sudden inability to breathe after climbing a hill or a pair of stairs, and after a long walk, is sometimes a symptom of the gout. There is a pain which suddenly pervades the head, breast, and limbs, which resembles an electric shock. I have known 2 instances of it in gouty patients and have taken the liberty of calling it the aura arthritica. But the pain which affects the muscles is often of a more permanent nature. It is felt with most severity in the calves of the legs. Sometimes it affects the muscles of the head, breast, and limbs, exciting in them large and distressing swellings. But further, the gout in some cases seizes upon the tendons and twists them in such a manner as to dislocate bones in the hands and feet. It even affects the cartilages. Of this I once saw an instance in Colonel Adams of the state of Maryland. The external parts of both his ears were so much inflamed in a fit of the gout that he was unable to lie on either of his sides. The gout affects the alimentary canal from the stomach to its termination in the rectum. Flatulency, sickness, acidity, indigestion, pain, or vomiting usually usher in a fit of the disease. The sick headache, also dyspepsia, with all its train of opountute. 2H distressing evils are frequently the effects of gout concentrated in the stomach. I have seen a case in which the gout, by retreating to this viscus, produced the same burning sensation which is felt in the yellow fever. The patient who was the subject of this symptom died 2 days afterwards with a black vomiting. It was Mr. Patterson, formerly collector of the Port of Philadelphia under the British government. I was not surprised at these 2 uncommon symptoms in the gout, for I had long been familiar with its disposition to affect the biliary secretion and the actions of the stomach. The colic and dysentery are often produced by the gout in the bowels. In the southern states of America, it sometimes produces a chronic diarrhea, which is known in some places by the name of the downward consumption. The piles are a common symptom of gout, and where they pour forth blood occasionally, render it a harmless disease. I have known an instance in which a gouty pain in the rectum produced involuntary stools in a gentleman in this city, and I have heard from a southern gentleman who had been afflicted with gouty symptoms that a similar pain was excited in the same part, to such a degree whenever he went into a crowded room lighted by candles as to oblige him to leave it. In considering the effects of the gout upon this part, I am led to take notice of a trouble, some itching in the anus, which has been described by Dr. Lettsom and justly attributed by him to this disease. I have known several cases of it. They always occurred in gouty habits. A distressing collection of air in the rectum, which renders frequent retirement from company necessary to discharge it, is likewise a symptom of gout. It is accompanied with frequent and small but hard stool. Of the above morbid affections of the nerves, stomach, and bowels, the hysteria, the sick headache, and the colic appear much oftener in women than in men. I have said that dyspepsia is a symptom of gout. Out of more than 500 persons who were the patients of the Liverpool Infirmary and Dispensary in 1 year, Dr. Curry informs us a great majority were females. Fixed. The gout affects the glands and lymphatics. It produced a salivation of a profuse nature in Major Pierce Butler, which continued for 2 days. It produced a bubo in the groin in a citizen of Philadelphia. He had never been infected with the T medical reports on the effects of hot and cold water, P215 venereal disease. Of course, no suspicion was entertained by me of its being derived from that cause. I knew a lady who had periodical swellings in her breasts at the same season of the year in which she had before been accustomed to have a regular fit of the gout. The scrofula and all the forms of dropsy are the effects in many cases of the disposition of the gout to attack the lymphatic system. There is a large hard swelling without pain of one or both the legs and thighs, which has been called a dropsy, but is very different from the common disease of that name. It comes on and goes off suddenly. It has lately been called in England the dumb gout. In the spring of 1798, I attended Colonel Innes of Virginia in consultation with my Edinburgh friend and fellow student, Dr. Walter Jones, of the same state. The colonel had large anasarcous swellings in his thighs and legs, which we had reason to believe were the effects of an indolent gout. We made several punctures in his feet and ankles, and thereby discharged a large quantity of water from his legs and thighs. A day or two afterwards, his encliel exhibited in pain and inflammation, the usual form of gout in those parts. In the year 1794, I attended Mrs. Lloyd Jones, who had a swelling of the same kind in her foot and leg. Her constitution, habits, and the sober manners of her ancestors gave me no reason to suspect it to arise from the usual causes of gout. She was feverish and her pulse was tense. One drew 10 ounces of blood from her and gave her a purge. The swelling subsided, but it was succeeded by an acute rheumatic pain in the part, which was cured in a few days. I mention these facts as an additional proof of the soundness of the gout and rheumatism, and to show that the vessels in a simple disease, as well as in malignant fevers, are often oppressed beyond that point in which they emit the sensation of pain. Under this head, I shall include an account of the mucus discharge from the urethra, which sometimes takes place in an attack of the gout, and which has ignorantly been ascribed to a venereal gonorrhea. There is a description of this symptom of the gout in the 3 volume of the Physical and Literary Essays of Edinburgh by Dr. Clarke. It was first taken notice of by Sauvages by the name of Gonorrhea Podagrica in a work entitled Pathologia Methodica. I have known 3 instances of it in this. In the visits which the gout pays to the genitals, it sometimes excites great pain in the testicles. Dr. White mentions 3 cases of this kind. One of them was attended with a troublesome itching of the scrotum. I have seen one case in which the testicles were affected with great pain, and the penis with an obstinate priapism. They succeeded a sudden translation of the gout from the bowels. From the occasional disposition of the gout to produce a mucus discharge from the urethra in men, it is easy to conceive that it is the frequent cause of the fecal bus in women, for in them the gout which is restrained from the feet, by a cause formerly mentioned, is driven to other parts, and particularly to that part which from its offices is more disposed to invite disease to it than any other. The flor alba sometimes occurs in females, apparently of the most robust habits. In such persons, more especially if they have been descended from gouty ancestors and have led indolent and luxurious lives. There can be no doubt but the disease is derived from the gout, and should be treated with remedies which act not only upon the affected part, but the whole system. An itching similar to that I formerly mentioned in the anus sometimes occurs in the vagina of women. Dr. Lettsom has described it. In all the cases I have known of it, I believe it was derived from the usual causes of the gout. There are many records in the annals of medicine of the gout affecting the skin. The erysipelas, gangrene, and petechia are its acute, and tetters and running sores are its usual chronic forms when it appears in this part of the body. I attended a patient with the late Dr. H. Hutchinson, in whom the whole calf of one leg was destroyed by a mortification which succeeded the gout. Dr. Alexander of Baltimore informed me that petechias were among the last symptoms of this disease in the Reverend Mr. Oliver, who died in the town of Baltimore about 2 years ago. In the disposition of the gout to attack external parts, it sometimes affects the eyes and ears with the most acute and distressing inflammation and pain. I hesitate the less in ascribing them both to the gout, because they not only occur in gouty habits, but because they now and then effuse a calcareous matter of the same nature with that which is found in the ligaments of the joints. Even the bones are not exempted from the ravages of this disease. I have before mentioned that the bones of the hands and feet are sometimes dislocated by it. I have heard of an instance in which it dislocated the thigh bone. It probably produced this effect by the effusion of that part of the blood which constitutes chalk stones, or by an excrescence of flesh in the cavity of the joint. 2 instances have occurred in this city of its dislodging the teeth, after having produced the most distressing pains in the jaws. The long, protracted, and acute pain in the face, which has been so accurately described by Dr. Fothergill, probably arises wholly from the gout acting upon the bones of the part affected. I have more than once hinted at the sameness of some of the states of the gout and the yellow fever. Who can compare the symptoms and seats of both diseases and not admit the unity of the remote and immediate causes of fever? Thus have I enumerated proofs of the gout being a disease of the whole system. I have only to add under this proposition that it affects different parts of the body in different people, according to the nature of their congenial or acquired temperaments, and that it often passes from one part of the body to another in the twinkling of an eye. The morbid excitement and actions of the gout when seated in the ligaments, the blood vessels and viscera, and left to themselves, produce effects different in their nature, according to the parts in which they take place. In the viscera, they produce congestions composed of all the component parts of the blood. From the blood vessels, which terminate in hollow cavities and in cellular membrane, they produce those effusions of serum which compose drops. From the same vessels proceed those effusions which produce on the skin erysipelas, tetters, and all the different kinds of eruptions. In the ligaments, they produce an effusion of coagulable lymph, which by stagnation is changed into what are called chalk stones. In the urinary organs, they produce an effusion of particles of coagulable lymph or red blood, which under certain circumstances are changed into sand, gravel, and stone. All these observations are liable to some exceptions. There are instances in which chalk stones have been found in the lungs, while on the eyelids, and in the passages of the ears, and a preternatural flux of water and blood has taken place from the kidneys. Pus has likewise been formed in the joints, and air has been found in the cavity of the belly instead of water. Sometimes the gout is said to combine with the fevers which arise from cold and miasmata. We are not to suppose from this circumstance that the system is under a twofold stimulus. By no means. The symptoms which are ascribed to the gout are the effects of morbid excitement excited by the cold, or miasmata acting upon parts previously debilitated by the usual remote causes of that disease. A bilious diathesis in the air so often excites the peculiar symptoms of gout in persons predisposed to it that it has sometimes been said to be epidemic. This was the case, Dr. Stoll says, in Vienna in the years 1782 and 1784. The same mixture of gouty and bilious symptoms was observed by Dr. Hilary in the fevers of Barbados. From a review of the symptoms of the gout, the impropriety of distinguishing it from its various seats by specific names must be obvious to the reader. As well might we talk of a yellower fever in the brain, in the nerves, or in the groin, when its symptoms affect those parts, as talk of misplaced or retractant gout. The great toe and the joints of the hands and feet are no more its exclusive seats than the stomach is the throne of the yellow fever. In short, the gout may be compared to a monarch whose empire is unlimited. The whole body crouches before it. It has been said as a reflection upon our profession that physicians are always changing their opinions respecting chronic diseases. For a long while, they were all classed under the heads of nervous or bilious. These names for many years afforded a sanctuary for the protection of fraud and an error in medicine. They have happily yielded of late years to the name of gout. If we mean by this disease a primary affection of the joints, we have gained nothing by assuming that name. But if we mean by it a disease which consists simply of morbid excitement, invited by debility, and disposed to invade every part of the body, we conform our ideas to facts, and thus simplify theory and practice in chronic diseases. I proceed now to treat of the method of cure. Let not the reader startle when I mention curing the gout. It is not a sacred disease. There will be no profanity in handling it freely. It has been cured often, and I hope to deliver such directions under this head as will reduce it as much under the power of medicine as a pleurisy or an intermitting fever. Let not superstition say here that the gout is the just punishment of folly and vice, and that the justice of heaven would be defeated by curing it. The venereal disease is more egregiously the effect of vice than the gout. And yet heaven has kindly directed human reason to the discovery of a remedy which effectually eradicates it from the constitution. This opinion of the gout being a curable disease is as humane as it is just. It is calculated to prompt to early application for medical aid, and to prevent that despair of relief and our, which has contributed so much to its duration and mortality. But does not the gout prevent other diseases? And is it not improper upon this account to cure it? I answer that it prevents other diseases, as the daily use of drams prevents the intermitting fever. In doing this, they bring on 100 more incurable morbid affections. The yellow fever carried off many chronic diseases in the year 1793, and yet who would wish for or admit such a remedy for a similar purpose? The practice of encouraging and inviting what has been called a friendly fit of the gout as a cure for other diseases resembles the practice of schoolboys who swallow the stones of cherries to assist their stomachs in digesting that delicate fruit. It is no more necessary to produce the gout in the feet in order to cure it than it is to wait for or encourage abscesses or natural hemorrhages to cure a fever. The practice originated at a time when morbific matter was supposed to be the cause of the gout, but it has unfortunately continued under the influence of theories which have placed the seat of the disease in the solids. The remedies for the gout naturally divide themselves into the following heads, i.e. such as are proper in its approaching or forming state, to see, such as are proper in violent morbid action in the blood vessels and viscera, tertia, such as are proper in a feeble morbid action in the same parts of the body, I-4, such as are proper to relieve certain local symptoms which are not accompanied by general morbid action, and V, such as are proper to prevent its recurrence or, in other words, to eradicate it from the system. The symptoms of an approaching fit of the gout are great languor and dullness of body and mind, doziness, giddiness, wakefulness, or sleep disturbed by vivid dreams, a dryness and sometimes a coldness, numbness and prickling in the feet and legs, a disappearance of pimples in the face, occasional chills, acidity and flatulency in the stomach, with an increased, a weak, or a defect of appetite. These symptoms are not universal, but more or less of them usher in nearly every fit of the gout. The reader will see at once their sameness with the premonitory symptoms of fever from cold and miasmata, and assent from this proof, in addition to others formerly mentioned, to the propriety of considering a fit of the gout as a paroxysm of fever. The system, during the existence of these symptoms, is in a state of morbid depression. The disease is as yet unformed and may easily be prevented by the loss of a few ounces of blood, or, if this remedy be objected to, by a gentle dose of physic. and afterwards by bathing the feet in warm water, by a few drops of the spirit of hartshorn in a little sage or chamomile tea, by a draught of wine, whey, or a common dose of liquid laudanum, and, according to a late Portuguese physician, by taking a few doses of bark. It is worthy of notice that if these remedies are omitted, all the premonitory symptoms that have been mentioned disappear as soon as the arthritic fever is formed, just as lassitude and chilliness yield to a paroxysm of fever from other causes. Of the remedies that are proper in cases of great morbid action in the blood vessels and viscera, I shall begin this head by repudiating the notion of a specific cure for the gout existing in any single article of the Materia Medica. Every attempt to cure it by elixirs, diet drinks, pills, or boluses, which were intended to act singly on the system, has been as unsuccessful as the attempts to cure the whooping cough by spells or tricks of legerdemain. The first remedy that I shall mention for reducing great morbid action in the blood vessels and viscera is bloodletting. I was first taught the safety of this remedy in the gout by reading the Works of Dr. Lister above 30 years ago, and I have used it ever since with great advantage. Ithis, the sanction of Dr. Hoffman, Dr. Cullen, and many others of the first names in medicine in its favor. The usual objections to bleeding as a remedy have been urged with more success in the gout than in any other disease. It has been forbidden because the gout is said to be a disease of debility. This is an error. Debility is not a disease. It is only its predisposing cause. Disease is preternatural strength in the state of the system now under consideration, occasioned by the abstraction of excitement from one part and the accumulation of it in another part of the body. Every argument in favor of bleeding in a pleurisy applies in the present instance, for they both depend upon the same kind of morbid action in the blood vessels. Bleeding acts, moreover, alike in both cases by abstracting the excess of excitement from the blood vessels and restoring its natural and healthy equality to every part of the system. It has been further said that bleeding disposes to more frequent returns of the gout. This objection to the lancet has been urged by Dr. Sydenham, who was misled in his opinion of it by his theory of the disease being the offspring of morbific matter. The assertion is unfounded, for bleeding in a fit of the gout has no such effect, provided the remedies to be mentioned hereafter are used to prevent it. But a fit of the gout is not singular in its disposition to recur after being once cured. The rheumatism, the pleurisy, and the intermitting fever are all equally disposed to return when persons are exposed to their remote and exciting causes. And yet we do not upon this account consider them as incurable diseases. Nor do we abstain from the usual remedies which cure them. The inflammatory or violent state of the gout is said most commonly to affect the limbs, but this is far from being the case. It frequently makes its first attack upon the head, lungs, kidneys, stomach, and bowels. The remedies for expelling it from the stomach and bowels are generally of a stimulating nature. They are as improper in full habits, and in the recent state of the disease, as cordials are to drive the smallpox from the vitals to the skin. Hundreds have been destroyed by them. Bleeding in these cases affords the same speedy and certain relief that it does in removing pain from the stomach and bowels in the first stage of the yellow fever. Colonel Miles owes his life to the loss of 60 ounces of blood in an attack of the gout in his bowels in the winter of 1795, and Major Butler derived the same benefit from the loss of near 30 ounces. In an attack of the gout in his stomach in the spring of 1798, I could add many more instances of the efficacy of the lancet in the gout when it affects the viscera from my own experience. But I prefer mentioning one only from Sir John Floyer, which is more striking than any I have met with in its favor. He tells us Sir Henry Coningsby was much disposed to the palsy from the gout when he was 30 years old. By frequent bleedings and the use of the cold bath, he recovered and lived to be 88. During his old age, he was bled every 3 months. I have said in the history of the symptoms of the gout that it sometimes appeared in the form of a hectic fever. I have prescribed occasional bleedings in a case of this kind, accompanied with a tense pulse, with the happiest effects. It confined the disease for several years wholly to the blood vessels, and it bid fair in time to eradicate it from the system. The state of the pulse, as described in another place, CN, should govern the use of the lancet in this disease. Bleeding is required as much in its depressed as in its full and corded state. Colonel Miles's pulse, at the time he suffered from the gout in his bowels, was scarcely perceptible. It did not rise till after a second or third bleeding. Some advantage may be derived from examining the blood. I have once known it to be dissolved, but for the most part I have observed it with Dr. Lister to be covered with the buffy coat of common inflammation. The arguments made use of in favor of bleeding in the diseases of old people in a former volume apply with equal force to its use in the gout. The inflammatory state of this disease frequently occurs in the decline of life, and bleeding is as much indicated in such cases as in any other inflammatory fever. The late Dr. C.H. Vet died with an inflammation in his liver from gout in the 86th year of his age. He was twice bled, and his blood each time was covered with a buffy coat. Where dye gout affects the head with obstinate pain and appears to be seated in the muscles, cupping and leeches give great release. This mode of bleeding should be trusted in those cases only in which the morbid action is confined chiefly to the head and appears in a feeble state in the rest of the arterial system. The advantages of bleeding in the gout, when performed under all the circumstances that have been mentioned, are as follow. 1. It removes or lends pain. 2. It prevents those congestions and effusions which produce apoplexy, palsy, pneumonia, nutha, calculi in the kidneys and bladder, and chalk stones in the hands and feet. The gravel and stone are 9 times in 10, I believe, the effects of an effusion of lymph or blood from previous morbid AC observations on Tion in the kidneys. If this disease were narrowly watched and cured as often as it occurs by the loss of blood, we should have but little gravel or stone among gouty people. A citizen of Philadelphia died a few years ago, in the 96th year of his age, who had been subject to the strangury the greatest part of his life. His only remedy for it was bleeding. He lived free from the gravel and stone, and died, or rather appeared to fall asleep in death from old age. Dr. Haller mentions a similar case in his Bibliotheca Medicins, in which bleeding had the same happy effects. 3. It prevents the system from wearing itself down by fruitless pain and sickness, and thereby inducing a predisposition to frequent returns of the disease. 4. It shortens the duration of a fit of gout by throwing it not into the feet, but out of the system, and thus prevents a patient's lying upon his back for 2 or 3 months with a writhing face, scolding a wife and family of children, and sometimes cursing every servant that comes near enough to endanger the touch of an inflamed limb. Besides preventing all this parade of pain and peevishness, it frequently, when assisted with other remedies to be mentioned present, restores a man to his business and society in 2 or 3 days, a circumstance this of great importance in the public as well as private pursuits of men. For who has not read of the most interesting affairs of nations being neglected or protracted by the principal agents in them being suddenly confined to their beds or chairs for weeks or months by a fit of the gout? 2. A second remedy in the state of the gout which has been mentioned is purging. Sulfur is generally preferred for this purpose, but castor oil, cream of tartar, senna, jalap, rhubarb, and calomel may all be used with equal safety and advantage. The stomach and habits of the patient should determine the choice of a suitable purge in every case. Salts are generally offensive to the stomach. They once brought on a fit of the gout in Dr. Brown. 3. Vomits may be given in all those cases where bleeding is objected to, or where the pulse is only moderately active. Mr. Small, in an excellent paper upon the gout in the 6th volume of the Medical Observations and Inquiries, p. 205, containing the history of his own case, tells us that he always took a vomit upon the first attack of the gout, and that it never failed of relieving all its symptoms. The matter discharged by this vomit indicated a morbid state of the liver, for it was always a dark greenish bile, which was insoluble in water. A British lieutenant, whose misfortunes reduced him to the necessity of accepting a bed in the poorhouse of this city, informed the late Dr. Steuben that he had once been much afflicted with the gout, and that he had upon many occasions strangled a fit of it by the early use of an emetic. Dr. Pai adds his testimony to those which have been given in favor of vomits, and says further that they do most service when they discharge an acid humor from the stomach. They appear to act in part by equalizing the divided excitement of the system, and in part by discharging the contents of the gallbladder and stomach, vitiated by the previous debility of those organs. Care should be taken not to exhibit this remedy where the gout attacks the stomach with symptoms of inflammation, or where it has a tendency to fix itself upon the brain. 4. Nitre may be given with advantage in cases of inflammatory action. Where the stomach is not affected, 5. A fifth remedy is cool or cold air. This is as safe and useful in the gout as in any other inflammatory state of fever. The affected limbs should be kept out of bed uncovered. In this way, Mr. Small says he moderated the pains of the gout in his hands and feet. I have directed the same practice with great comfort, as well as advantage to my patients. Even cold water has been applied with good effects to a limb inflamed by the gout. Mr. Blair McClenachin taught me the safety and benefit of this remedy by using it upon himself without the advice of a physician. He instantly removed his pain, nor was the gout translated by it to any other part of his body. It was removed in the same manner, Dr. Herberton tells us, by the celebrated Dr. Harvey from his own feet. Perhaps it would be best in most cases to prefer cool or cold air to cold water. The safety and advantages of both these modes of applying cold to the affected limbs show the impropriety of the common practice of wrapping them in flannel. 6th, diluting liquors, such as are prescribed in common inflammatory fevers, should be given in such quantities as to dispose to a gentle perspiration. 7. Abstinence from wine, spirits, and malt liquors, also from such aliments as afford much now 264 observations on nourishment or stimulus, should be carefully enjoined. Sago panada, tapioca, diluted milk with bread, and the pulp of apples, summer fruits, tea, coffee, weak chocolate, and bread soaked in chicken water or beef tea should constitute the principal diet of patients in due state of the gout. 8. Blisters are an invaluable remedy in this disease when used at a proper time, that is, after the reduction of the morbid actions in the system by evacuations. They should be applied to the joints of the feet and wrists in general gout, and to the neck and sides when it attacks the head or breast. A strangury from the gout is no objection to their use. So far from increasing this complaint, Dr. Clark and Dr. White inform us that they remove it, but the principal advantage of blisters is derived from their collecting and concentrating scattered and painful sensations and conveying them out of the system, and thus becoming excellent substitutes for a tedious fit of the gout. 9. Fear and terror have in some instances cured a paroxysm of this disease. A captain of a British ship of war, who had been confined for several weeks to his cabin by a severe fit of the gout in his feet, was suddenly cured by hearing the cry of fire on board his ship. This fact was communicated to me by a gentleman who was a witness of it. Many similar cases are upon record in books of medicine. I shall in another place insert an account of one in which the cure effected by a fright eradicated the disease from the system so completely as ever afterwards to prevent its return. Thus have I enumerated the remedies which are proper in the gout when it affects the blood vessels and viscera with great morbid action. Most of those remedies are alike proper when the morbid actions are seated in the muscular fibers, whether of the bowels or limbs, and whether they produce local pain or general convulsion, provided they are of a violent nature. There are some remedies under this head of a doubtful nature, on which I shall make a few observations. Sweating has been recommended in this state of the gout. All the objections to it in preference to other modes of depletion mentioned in another place can apply against its use in the inflammatory state of the gout. It is not only less safe than bleeding, purging, and abstinence, but it is often an impracticable remedy. The only sudorific medicine to be trusted in this state of the disease is the Seneca snake root. It promotes all the secretions and excretions and exerts but a feeble stimulus upon the arterial system. Many different preparations of opium have been advised in this state of the gout. They are all hurtful if given before the morbid action of the system is nearly reduced. It should then be given in small doses accommodated to the excitability of the system. Applications of various kinds to the affected limbs have been used in a fit of the gout, and some of them with success. The late Dr. Chalmers of South Carolina used to meet the pain of the gout as soon as it fixed in any of his limbs with a blister, and generally removed it by that means in 2 or 3 days. I have imitated this practice in several cases, and always with success, nor have I ever seen the gout thrown upon any of the viscera by means of this remedy. Caustics have sometimes been applied to gouty limbs with advantage. The moxa described and used by Sir William Temple, which is nothing but culinary fire, has often not only given relief to a pained limb, but carried off a fit of the gout in a few hours. These powerful applications may be used with equal advantage in those cases in which the gout by falling upon the head produces coma, or symptoms of apoplexy. A large casuistic to the neck roused Mr. John M. Hill Nesbit from a coma in which he had lain for 3 days and thereby appeared to save his life. Blisters and cataplasms of mustard had been previously used to different parts of his body, but without the least effect. In cases of moderate pain, where a blister has been objected to, I have seen a cabbage leaf afford considerable relief. It produces a moisture upon the part affected, without exciting any pain. An old sea captain taught me to apply molasses to a limb inflamed or pained by the gout. I have frequently advised it, and generally with advantage. All volatile and stimulating liniments are improper, for they not only endanger a translation of the morbid excitement to the viscera, but where they have not this effect, they increase the pain and inflammation of the part affected. The sooner a patient exercises his lower limbs by walking after a fit of the gout, the better. I made it a constant rule, says Mr. Small, to walk abroad as soon as the inflammatory state of the gout was past, and though by so doing I often suffered great pain, I am well convinced that the free use I now enjoy of my limbs is chiefly owing to my determined perseverance in the use of that exercise. Nor am I less persuaded that 9 in 10 of gouty cripples owe their lameness more to indolence and fear of pain than to the genuine effects of the gout. Sir William Temple confirms the propriety of Mr. Small's opinion and practice by an account of an old man who obviated a fit of the gout as often as he felt it coming in his feet, by walking in the open air, and afterwards by going into a warm bed, and having the parts well rubbed where the pain began. By following this course, he says, he was never laid up with the gout, and before his death recommended the same course to his son, if ever he should fall into that accident. Under a conviction of the safety of this practice, the same author concludes the history of his own case in the following words. I favored it, off as is, the swelling in my feet all this while more than I needed, upon the common opinion, that walking too much might draw down the humor, which I have since had reason to conclude is a great mistake, and that if I walked as much as I could from the first day the pain left me, the swelling might have left me too in a much less timeline. I come now to mention the remedies which are proper in that state of the gout, in which a feeble morbid action takes place in the blood vessels and viscera. I shall begin this head by remarking that this state of the gout is often created, like the typhus state of fever, by the neglect, or too scanty use of evacuations in its first stage. When the prejudices which now prevent the adoption of those remedies in their proper time are removed, we shall hear but little of the low state of the arthritic fever, nor of the numerous diseases from obstruction which are produced by the blood vessels disorganizing the viscera by repeated and violent attacks of the disease, to determine the character of a paroxysm of gout and the remedies proper to relieve it. The climate, the season of the year, the constitution of the atmosphere, and the nature of the prevailing epidemic should be carefully attended to by a Phi edition, p. 143 and 141, Session. But his principal dependence should be placed upon the state of the pulse. If it do not discover the marks which indicate bleed-ins are formerly referred to, but is weak, quick, and soft, the remedies should be such as are calculated to produce a more vigorous and equable action in the blood vessels and viscera. They are 1. Opium. It should at first be given in small doses and afterwards increased as circumstances may require. 2. Madeira or sherry wine alone or diluted with water, or in the form of whey, or rendered more cordial by having any agreeable spice infused in it. It may be given cold or warm according to the taste of the patient, or the state of his stomach. If this medicine be rejected in all the above forms, 3 porters should be given. It is often retained when no other liquor will lie upon the stomach. I think I once saved the life of Mr. Nesbit by this medicine. It checked the vomiting from the gout, which seemed to be the last symptom of his departing life. If porter fail of giving relief, 4. Ardent spirits should be given, either alone or in the form of grog or toddy. Cases have HEC urine, which a pint of brandy has been taken in the course of an hour with advantage. Great benefit has sometimes been found from Dr. Warner's tincture in this state of the gout. As these observations may fall into the hands of persons who may not have access to Dr. Warner's book, I shall here insert the receipt for preparing it. Of raisins, sliced and stoned, 1/2 pound, coriander and fennel seeds of each 1 drachma, cochineal, saffron, and licorice root, each 1/2 drachm. Infuse them for 10 days in a quart of French brandy, then strain it and add a pint more of brandy to the ingredients. Afterwards strain it and mix both tinctures together. 4 tablespoonfuls of this cordial are to be taken every hour, mixed with an equal quantity of water until relief be obtained. 10 drops of laudanum may be added to each dose in those cases in which the cordial does not produce its intended effects in 2 or 3 hours. If all the different forms of ardent spirits which have been mentioned fail of giving relief, 5. From 30 drops to a teaspoonful of ather should be given in any agreeable vehicle. Also, 6 volatile alkali. From 5 to 10 grains of this medicine should be given every 2 hours. 7. Aromatic substances such as allspice, ginger, Virginia snakeroot, cloves, and mace, in the form of teas, have all been useful in this state of the gout. All these remedies are indicated in a more especial manner when the gout affects the stomach. They are likewise proper when it affects the bowels. The laudanum in this case should be given by way of blister. After the vomiting was checked in Mr. Nesbit by means of porter, he was afflicted with a dull and distressing pain in his bowels, which was finally removed by 2 anodyne glisters injected daily for 2 or 3 weeks. 8. Where the gout produces spasmodic or convulsive motions, the oil of amber may be given with advantage. I once saw it remove for a while a convulsive cough from the gout. 9. In cases where the stomach will bear the bark, it should be given in large and frequent doses. It does the same service in this state of gout that it does in the slow or low states of fever from any other cause. Where the gout appears in the form of an intermittent, the bark affords the same relief that it does in the same disease from autumnal exhalations. Mr. Small found great benefit from it after discharging the contents of his stomach and bowels by a dose of tartar emetic. I do not call, says this gentleman, a fit of the gout a paroxysm, for there are several paroxysms in the fit, each of which is ushered in with a rigor, sickness at stomach, and subsequent heat. In this, the gout bears a resemblance to an irregular intermittent, at least to a remitting fever, and hence perhaps the efficacy of the bark in removing the gout tendon. The warm bath is a powerful remedy in exciting a regular and healthy action in the sanguiferous system. Where the patient is too weak to be taken out of bed and put into a bathing tub, his limbs and body should be wrapped in flannels dipped in warm water. In case of a failure of all the above remedies, 11. A salivation should be excited as speedily as possible by means of mercury. Dr. Cheyenne, 274 observation, commends it in high terms. I have once used it with success. The mercury, when used in this way, brings into action an immense mass of latent excitement, and afterwards diffuses it equally through every part of the body. 12 to it. Besides these internal remedies, frictions with brandy and volatile liniment should be used to the stomach and bowels. Blisters should be applied to parts in which congestion or pain is seated, and stimulating cataplasms should be applied to the lower limbs. The flower of mustard has been justly preferred for this purpose. It should be applied to the upper part of the foot. The reader will perceive, in the account I have given of the remedies proper in the feeble state of chronic fever, that they are the same which are used in the common typhus, or what is called nervios fever. There is no reason why they should not be the same, for the supposed 2 morbid states of the system are but one disease. It is agreeable in medical researches to be under the direction of principles. They render unnecessary, in many instances, the slow and expensive operations of experience, and thus multiply knowledge by lessening labor. The science of Navi the Gout. 275 Gaetian has rested upon this basis since the Discone vary of the lodestone. A mariner who has navigated a ship to one distant port is capable of conducting her to every port on the globe. In like manner, the physician who can cure one disease by knowledge of its principles may by the same means cure all the diseases of the human body, for their causes are the same. Judgment is required only in accommodating the force of remedies to the force of each disease. The difference in diseases which arises from their seats, horn age, sex, habit, season, and climate may be known in a short time, and is within the compass of very moderate talents. Were I to enumerate all the local symptoms of gout which occur without fever, and the remedies that are proper to relieve them, I should be led into a tedious digression. The reader must consult practical books for an account of it. I shall mention the remedies for a few of them. The theory of the gout which has been delivered will enable us to understand the reason why a disease which properly belongs to the whole system should at any time be accompanied only with local morbid affection. The whole body is a unit, and hence morbid impressions which are resisted by sound parts are propagated to such as are weak. Where they excite those morbid actions we call disease. The bedock is a distressing symptom of the gout. It yields to depleting or tonic remedies according to the degree of morbid action which accompanies it. I have heard an instance of an old man who was cured of an obstinate headache by throwing aside his nightcap and sleeping with his bare head exposed to the night air. The disease in this case was probably attended with great morbid action. In this state of the vessels of the brain, cupping, cold applications to the head, purges, a temperate diet, and blisters behind the ears are all proper remedies, and should be used together, or in succession, as the nature of the disease may require. Many persons have been cured of the same complaint by sleeping woolen nightcaps. The morbid action in these cases is all was of a feeble nature. With this remedy, tonics, particularly the bark and cold bath, will be proper. I have once known a chronic gouty pain in the head cured by an issue in the arm, after pounds of bark and many other tonic remedies had been taken to no purpose. The ophthalmia from gout should be treated with the usual remedies for that disease when it arises from other causes, with the addition of such local applications to other and distant parts of the body as may abstract the gouty action from the eyes. Dull but constant pains in the limbs yield to frictions, volatile liniments, muslin and woolen, worn next to the skin, electricity, a salivation, and the warm and cold bath. A gentleman who was afflicted with a pain of this kind for 3 years and a half in one of his arms informed me that he had been cured by wearing a woolen stocking that had been boiled with sulfur and water for 2 weeks upon the affected limb. He had previously doubly worn flannel upon it, but without receiving any benefit from it. I have known wool and cotton, finely carded and made into small mats, worn upon the hips when affected by gout with great advantage. In obstinate sciatic pains without fever or inflammation, Dr. Pitcairn's remedy, published by Dr. Shane, has performed many cures. It consists in taking from 1 to 4 teaspoonsful of the fine spirit of turpentine every morning, for a week or 10 days, and 3 times the quantity of honey, and afterwards in drinking a large quantity of sack whey to settle it on the stomach and canny it into the blood. An anodyne should be taken every night after taking this medicine. A gouty diarrhea should be treated with the usual astringent medicines of the shops. Blisters to the wrists and ankles, also a salivation, have often cured. I have heard of its being checked after continuing for many years by the patient eating large quantities of allspice, which he carried loose in his pocket for that purpose. The angina pectoris, which I have said is a symptom of the gout, generally comes on with fullness and tension in the pulse. After these are reduced by 2 or 3 bleedings, mineral tonics seldom fail of giving relief. Spas and ease in the stomach and pains in the bowels often seize gouty people in the midst of business or pleasure, or in the middle of the night. My constant prescription for these complaints is 10 drops of laudanum every half hour till relief be obtained. If this medicine be taken in the forming state of these pains, a single dose generally removes the disease. It is preferable to spiced wine and spirits, inasmuch as it acts quicker and leaves no disposition to contract a love for it when it is not required to ease pain. The pain in the rectum, which has been described, yields to the common remedies for the piles. Cold water applied to the part generally gives immediate relief. For a preternatural secretion and excretion of bile, gentle laxatives, and abstinence from oily food, full meals, and all violent exercises of the body and mind are proper. The itching in the anus, which I am supposed to be a symptom of gout, has yielded in one instance that has come within my knowledge to mercurial ointment applied to the part affected. Dr. Letzam recommends fomenting the part with a decoction of poppy heads and hemlock and advises lenient purges and a vegetable diet as a radical cure for the disease. For the itching in the vagina, I have found a solution of the sugar of lead in water to be an excellent palliative application. Dr. Letzam recommends as a cure for it the use of bark in delicate habits and occasional bleeding with a light and moderate diet, if it occur about the time of the cessation of the menses. Obstinate cutaneous eruptions, which are the effects of gout, have been cured by gentle physic, a suitable diet, issues, and applications of the unguentum citrinum to the parts affected. The arthritic gonorrhea should be treated with the same remedies as a gonorrhea from any other cause. In the treatment of all the local symptoms that have been enumerated, it will be of great consequence to inquire, before we attempt to cure them, whether they have not succeeded general gout, and thereby relieve the system from its effects in parts essential to life. If this had been the case, the cure of them should be undertaken with caution, and the danger of a local disease being exchanged for a general one should be obviated by remedies that are calculated to eradicate the gouty diathesis altogether from the system. The means for this purpose, agreeably to our order, come next under our consideration. Before I enter upon this head, I shall premise that I do not admit of the seeds of the gout remaining in the body to be eliminated by art after a complete termination of one of its paroxysms, any more than I admit of the seeds of a pleurisy, or intermitting fever remaining in the body after they have been cured by bloodletting six or bark. A predisposition only remains in the system to a return of the gout from its usual remote and exciting causes. The contrary idea took its rise in those ages of medicine in which morbific matter was supposed to be the proximate cause of the gout, but it has unfortunately continued since the rejection of that view. Thus, in many cases, we see wrong habits continue long after the principles have been discarded from which they were derived. I have known several instances in which art, and I have heard and read of others in which accidental suffering from abstinence, pain, and terror have been the happy means of overcoming a predisposition to the gout. A gentleman from one of the West India Islands, who had been for many years afflicted with the gout, was perfectly cured of it by living a year or two upon the temperate diet of the jail in this city, into which he was thrown for debt by one of his creditors. A large hemorrhage from the foot, inflamed and swelled by the gout, accidentally produced by a penknife which fell upon it, effected in an Irish gentleman a lasting cure of the disease. Hildanus mentions the history of a gentleman whom he knew intimately, who was radically cured of a gout with which he had been long afflicted. By the extreme bodily pain, he suffered 28-pound observations on, feared innocently from torture in the canton of Bern. He lived to be an old man, and ever afterwards enjoyed good health. The following letter from my brother contains the history of a case in which terror suddenly eradicated the gout from the system. Reading July 21st, 1797. Dear brother, when I had the pleasure of seeing you last week, I mentioned an extraordinary cure of the gout in this town by means of a fright. In compliance with your request, I now send an exact narration of the facts. Peter Feather, the person cured, is now alive. A householder in Reading, 73 years of age, a native of Germany, and a very hearty man. The first fit of the gout he ever had was about the year 1773, and from that time till 1785, he had a regular attack in the spring of every year. His feet, hands, and elbows were much swollen and inflamed. The fits lasted long and were excruciating. In particular, the last fit in 1785 was so severe as to induce an apprehension that it would inevitably carry him off when he was suddenly relieved by the following accident. As he lay in a small back room adjoining the yard, it happened that one of his sons, in turning a wagon and horses, drove the tongue of the wagon with such force against the window, near which the old man lay stretched on a bed, as to beat in the sash of the window, and to scatter the pieces of broken glass all about him. To such a degree was he alarmed by the noise and violence, that he instantly leaped out of bed, forgot that he had ever used crutches, and eagerly inquired what was the matter. His wife, hearing the uproar, ran into the room where, to her astonishment, she found her husband on his feet, bawling against the author of the mischief, with the most passionate vehemence. From that moment, he has been entirely exempt from the gout, has never had the slightest touch of it, and now enjoys perfect health, has a good appetite, and says he was never heartier in his life. This is probably the more remarkable when I add that he has always been used to the hard work of a farm, and since the year 1785 has frequently mowed in his own meadow, which I understand is low and wet. I am well informed in his mode of living. He has been temperate, occasionally indulging in a glass of wine after the manner of the German farmers, but not to excess. To you who have been long accustomed to explore diseases, I leave the task of developing the principles on which this mysterious restoration from the lowest decrepitude and bodily wretchedness to a state of perfect health has been accomplished. I will know that toothaches, headaches, hiccoughs, and are often removed by the sudden impression of fear, and that they return again. But to see a debilitated gouty frame instantly restored to vigor, to see the whole system in a moment, as it were, undergo a perfect and entire change, and the most inveterate and incurable disease radically expelled, is surely a different thing, and must be acknowledged a very singular and marvelous event, if an old man, languishing under disease and infirmity, had died of mere fright. Nobody would have been surprised at it. But that he should be absolutely cured, and his constitution renovated by it, is a most extraordinary fact, which, while I am compelled to believe by unexceptionable evidence, I am totally at a loss to account for. I am your sincerely affectionate brother, Jacob Rush. These facts, and many similar ones which might be mentioned, afford ample encouragement to proceed in enumerating the means which are proper to prevent the recurrence of the gout, or in other words, to eradicate it from the system. I shall first mention the means of preventing the return of that state of the disease which is accompanied with violent action, and afterwards take notice of the means of preventing the return of that state of it, in which a feeble morbid action takes place in the blood vessels. The means for this purpose consist in avoiding all the remote, exciting, and predisposing causes of the gout which have been mentioned. I shall say a few words upon the most important of them in the order that has been proposed. The first remedy for obviating the violent state of gout is 1. Temperance. This should be regulated in its degrees by the age, habits, and constitution of the patient. A diet consisting wholly of milk, vegetables, and simple water has been found necessary to prevent the recurrence of the gout in some cases. But in general, fish, eggs, the white meats, and wheat broths may be taken in small quantities once a day, with milk and vegetables at other times. A little salted meat, which affords less nourishment than fresh, may be eaten occasionally. It imparts vigor to the stomach and prevents dyspepsia from a diet consisting chiefly of vegetables. The low and acid wines should be avoided, but weak Madeira or sherry wine and water or small beer may be drunken at meals. The latter liquor was the favorite drink of Dr. Sydenham in his fits of the gout. Strong tea and coffee should not be tasted, where there is reason to believe the habitual use of them has contributed to bring on the disease. From the disposition of the gout to return the spring and autumn, greater degrees of abstinence in eating and drinking will be necessary at those seasons than at any other time. With this diminution of aliment, gentle purges should be taken to obviate an attack of the gout. In persons above 50 years of age, an abstemious mode of living should be commenced with aureate caution. It has sometimes, when entered upon suddenly and carried to its utmost extent, induced fits of the gout and precipitated death. In such persons, the abstractions from their usual diet should be small. and our dependence should be placed upon other means to prevent a return of the disease. Moderate labor and gentle exercise have frequently removed that debility and vibratility in the blood vessels on which a predisposition to the gout depends. Hundreds of persons who have been reduced by misfortunes to the necessity of working for their daily bread have thrown off a gouty diathesis derived from their parents, or acquired by personal acts of folly and intemperance. The employments of agriculture afford the most wholesome labor, and walking the most salutary exercise. To be useful, they should be moderate. The extremes of indolence and bodily activity meet in a point. They both induce debility, which predisposes to a recurrence of a fit of the gout. Riding in a carriage and on horseback are less proper as a means of preventing the disease than walking. Their action upon it is partial. The lower limbs derive no benefit from it, and on these the violent state of gout generally makes its first attack. In England, many domestic exercises have been contrived for gouty people, such as shuttlecock, bullets, the chamber horse, and the like, but they are all trifling in their effects compared with labor and exercise in the open air. The efficacy of the former of those prophylactic remedies will appear in a strong point of light when we consider how much the operation of the remote and exciting causes of the gout, which act more or less upon persons in the humblest ranks of society, are constantly counteracted in their effects by the daily labor which is necessary for thick subsistence. 3. To prevent the recurrence of the gout, cold should be carefully avoided, more especially when it is combined with moisture. Flannel should be worn next to the skin in winter, and muslin in summer, in order to keep up a steady and uniform perspiration. Fleecy hosiery should be worn in cold weather upon the breast and knees, and the feet should be kept constantly warm and dry by means of socks and cork-soled shoes. It was by wetting his feet by standing 2 or 3 hours upon the damp ground that Colonel Miles produced the gout in his stomach and bowels, which had nearly destroyed him in the year 1795-4. Great moderation should be used by persons who are subject to the gout in the exercise of their understandings and passions. Intense study, fear, terror, anger, and even joy have often excited the disease into action. It has been observed that the political and military passions act with more force upon the system than those which are of a social and domestic nature. Hence generals and statesmen are so often afflicted with the gout, and that too, as was hinted in another place, in moments the most critical and important to the welfare of a nation. The combination of the exercises of the understanding and the passion of avarice in gaming have often produced an attack of this disease. These facts show the necessity of gouty people subjecting their minds, with all their operations, to the government of reason and religion. The understanding should be exercised only upon light and pleasant subjects. No study should ever be pursued till it brings on fatigue, and above all things, midnight, and even late studies should be strictly avoided. A gouty man should always be in bed at an early hour. This advice has the sanction of Dr. Sydenham's name, and experience proves its efficacy in all chronic diseases. 5. The venereal appetite should be indulged with moderation. And 6. Costiveness should be prevented by all persons who wish to escape a return of violent fits of the gout. Sulphur is an excellent remedy for this purpose. Dr. Sheen commends it in high terms. His words are, "Sulphur is one of the best remedies in the intervals of the gout. In the whole extent of the materia medica, I know not a more volume higher." 2. Safe and active medicine. 2 cases have come within my knowledge, in which it has kept off fits of the gout for several years, in persons who had been accustomed to have them once or twice a year. Rhubarb in small quantities chewed or in the form of pills may be taken to obviate costiveness. By persons who object to the habitual use of sulphur, Dr. Sheen, who is lavish in his praises of that medicine as a gentle laxative, says, "He knew a noble lord of great worth and much gout, who, by taking from the hands of a quack a drachm of rhubarb, tinged with cochineal to disguise it, every morning for 6 weeks, lived in health for 4 years after, without any symptom of EFF. I have said that abstinence should be enjoined with more strictness in the spring and autumn than at any other time to prevent a return of the gout. From the influence of the weather at those seasons and exciting febrile actions in the system, the loss of a pint of blood will be useful in some cases for the same purpose. It will be the more necessary if the gout has not paid its habitual visits to the system. The late Dr. Gregory had been accustomed to an attack of the gout every spring. 2C gout, P35, T page 3. Sons passed away without his feeling any symptoms of it. He began to flatter himself with a hope that the predisposition to the disease had left him. Soon afterwards, he died suddenly of an apoplexy. The loss of a few ounces of blood at the usual time in which the gout affected him would probably have protracted his life for many years. In the year 1796, in visiting a patient, I was accidentally introduced into a room where a gentleman from the Delaware state had been lying on his back for near 6 weeks with an acute fit of the gout. He gave me a history of his sufferings. His pulse was full and tense, and his whole body was covered with sweat from the intensity of his pain. He had not had his boxals open for 10 days. I advised purging and bleeding in his case. The very names of those remedies startled him, for he had adopted the opinion of the salutary nature of a fit of the gout, and therefore hugged his chains. After explaining the reason of my prescriptions, he informed me in support of them, that he had escaped the gout but 2 years and 20, and that in one of these 2 years he had been bled for a fall from his horse, and in the other his body had been reduced by a chronic fever. Previously to the time of the annual visit of his gout, as a proof of the efficacy of active or passive depletion. In preventing the gout, it has been found that persons who sweat freely, either generally or partially, or who make a great deal of water, are rarely affected by it. An epitome of all that has been said upon the means of preventing a return of the gout may be delivered in a few words. A man who has had one fit of it should consider himself in the same state as a man who has received the seeds of a malignant fever into his blood. He should treat his body as if it were a Florence flask. By this means he will probably prevent, during his life, the re-excitement of the disease. Are issues proper to prevent the return of the violent state of gout? I have heard of an instance of an issue in the leg having been effectual for this purpose, but if the remedies before mentioned be used in the manner that has been directed, so unpleasant a remedy can seldom be necessary. Are bitters proper to prevent a return of this state of spoiled? It will be a sufficient answer to this question to mention that the Duke of Portland's powder, which is composed of bitter ingredients, excited a fatal gout in many people who used it for that purpose. I should as soon expect to see gold produced by the operations of fire upon copper or lead, as expect to see the gout prevented or cured by any medicine that acted upon the system, without the aid of more or less of the remedies that have been mentioned. Tukai. We come now, in the last place, to mention the remedies which are proper to prevent a return of that state of gout, which is attended with a feeble morbid action in the blood vessels and viscera. This state of gout generally occurs in the evening of life, and in persons of delicate habits, or in such as have had their constitutions worn down by repeated attacks of the disease. The remedies to prevent it are 1. A gently stimulating diet, consisting of animal food well cooked, with sound old Madeira or sherry wine or weak spirit and water, salted, and even smoked meat may be taken in this state of the system with advantage. It is an agreeable tonic and is less disposed to create plethora than fresh meat. Pickles and vinegar should seldom be tasted. They dispose to gouty spasms in the stomach and bowels. Long intervals between meals should be carefully avoided. The stomach, when overstretched or empty, is always alike predisposed to disease. There are cases in which the evils of inanition in the stomach will be prevented by a gouty patient eating in the middle of the night. 2. The use of chalybeate medicines. These are more safe when used habitually than bitters. I have long been in the practice of giving the different preparations of iron in large doses in chronic diseases, and in that state of debility which disposes to them. A lady of a weak constitution informed Dr. Chenier that she once asked Dr. Sydenham how long she might safely take steel. His answer was that she might take it for 30 years, and then begin again if she continued ill. Water impregnated with iron, either by nature or art, may be taken. It will be more useful if it be drunken in a place where patients will have the benefit of country air. 3. The habitual use of the volatile tincture of gum guaiacum and of other cordial and gently sty the gout P69 mulating medicines. A clove of garlic taken once or twice a day has been found useful in debilitated habits predisposed to the gout. It possesses a wonderful power in bringing latent excitement into action. It moreover acts agreeably upon the nervous system. Mr. Small found great benefit from breakfasting upon a tea made of half a drachm of ginger, cut into small slices, in preventing occasional attacks of the gout in his stomach. Sir Joseph Banks was much relieved by a diet of milk, with ginger boiled in it. The root of the sassafras of our country might probably be used with advantage for the same purpose. Aurelian speaks of certain remedies for the gout which he calls analiae. The above medicines belong to this class. To be effectual, they should be persisted in not for 1 year only, but for many years. 4. Warmth uniformly applied by means of suitable dresses and sitting rooms to every part of the body. 5. The warm bath in winter and the temperate or cold bath in summer. 6. Exercise. This may be in a carnage or on horseback. The viscera being debilitated in this state of predisposition to the gout are strengthened in a peculiar manner by the gentle motion of a horse. Where this or other modes of passive exercise cannot be had, frictions to the limbs and body should be used every day. 7. Costorousness should be avoided by taking occasionally 1 or 2 tablespoonfuls of Dr. Warner's purging tincture, prepared by infusing rhubarb, orange peel, and caraway seeds of each an ounce for 3 days in a quart of Madeira, or any other white wine. If this medicine be ineffectual for opening the bowels, rhubarb may be taken in the manner formerly mentioned. 8. The understanding and passions should be constantly employed in agreeable studies and pursuits. Fatigue of mind and body should be carefully avoided. 9. A warm climate often protracts life in persons subject to this state of gout. The citizens of Rome, who had worn down their constitutions by intemperance, added many years to their lives. By migrating to Naples and enjoying there in a warmer sun the pure air of the Mediterranean, and Sir William Temple says the Portuguese obtained the same benefit by transporting themselves to the Brazils. After medicine and diet ceased to impart vigor to their constitutions in their native country. Thus have I enumerated the principal remedies for curing and preventing the gout. Vast of them are to be met with in books of medicine, but they have been administered by physicians or taken by patients with so little regard to the different states of the system that they have in many instances done more harm than good. Solomon places all wisdom in the management of human affairs in finding out the proper times for performing certain actions. Skill in medicine consists in an eminent degree in timing remedies. There is a time to bleed and a time to withhold the lancet. There is a time to give physic and a time to trust to the operations of nature. There is a time to eat meat, and there is a time to abstain from it. There is a time to give tonic medicines and a time to refrain from them. In a word, the cure of the gout depends wholly upon 2 things, viz., proper remedies and their proper times and places. I shall take leave of this disease by comparing it to a deep and dreary cave in a new country, in which ferocious beasts and venomous reptiles, with vol our ear, 2p numerous ghosts and hobgoblins are said to reside. The neighbors point at the entrance of this cave with horror, and tell of the many ravages that have been committed upon their domestic animals, by the cruel tenants which inhabit it. At length a schoolboy, careless of his safety, ventures to enter the subterraneous cavern, when, to his great delight, he finds nothing in it but the same kind of stones and water he left behind him upon the surface of the earth. In like manner, I have found no other principles necessary to explain the cause of the gout, and no other remedies necessary to cure it, than such as are admitted in explaining the causes, and in prescribing for the most simple and common diseases. Upon the nature and cure of the hydrophobia. Observations and easy equals in entering upon the consideration of this formidable disease. I feel envious self under an involuntary impression, somewhat like that which was produced by the order that King of Syria gave to his captains when he was conducting them to battle. For fight not with small or great, save only with the King of Israel. In whatever light we contemplate the hydrophobia, It may be considered as preeminent in power and mortality over all other diseases. It is now many years since the distress and horror excited by it, both in patients and their friends, led me with great solicitude to investigate its nature. I have at length satisfied myself with the theory of it, which I hope will lead to a rational and successful mode of treating it. For a history of the symptoms of the disease, and many interesting facts connected with it, I beg leave to refer the reader to Dr. Mies's learned and ingenious inaugural dissertation, published in the year 1792. The remote and exciting causes of the hydrophobia are as follow. 1. The bite of a rabid animal. Wolves, foxes, cats, as well as dogs impart the disease. It has been said that blood must be drawn in order to produce it. But I have heard of a case in Lancaster County in Pennsylvania in which a severe contusion by the teeth of the rabid animal, without the effusion of a drop of red blood, excited the disease. Happily for mankind, it cannot be communicated by blood or saliva falling upon sound parts of the body. In Maryland, the Negroes eat with safety the flesh of hogs that have perished from the bite of mad dogs, and I have heard of the milk of a cow. At Chestertown, in the same state, having been used without any inconvenience by a whole family, on the very day in which she was affected by this disease, and which killed her in a few hours. Dr. Baumgarten confirms these facts by saying that the flesh and milk of rabid animals have been eaten with perfect impunity. In the following observations, I shall confine myself chiefly to the treatment of the hydrophobia, which arises from the bite of a rabid animal. But I shall add in this place a short account of all its other causes. 2 Cold Night Air. Dr. Arthur, late president of the Society of Philadelphians in St. Domingo, has published several cases in which it was produced in Negroes by sleeping all night in the open air. 3 A wound in a tendinous part. 4 Putrid and impure animal food. 5 Worms. 6 Eating beech nuts. 7 Great thirst. 8 Exposure to intense heat. 9 Drinking cold water when the body was very much heated. 10 A fall. 11 Fear. 12 Hysteria. 13 Epilepsy. 14 Tetanus. 15 Hydrocephalus. Of the presence of hydrophobia in the hydrocephalic state of fever, there have been several instances in Philadelphia. 16 An inflammation of the stomach. Dr. Trotter mentions the hydrophobia as a symptom which frequently occurred in the typhus state of fever in the British Navy. 19. It is taken notice of likewise in a putrid fever by Dr. Costes, and Dr. Orifertz observed it in a high degree in a young lady who died of the yellow fever in 1793. Chapter 5. Medical Inquiries and Observations, Volume 1, Part 5. The use of the cold bath in the morning and of the warm bath in the evening are happily calculated to strengthen the body in the former part of the day, and to restore it in the latter from the languor and fatigue which are induced by heat and labor. Let it not be said, ardent spirits have become necessary from habit in harvest, and in other seasons of uncommon and arduous labor. The habit is a bad one, and may be easily broken. Let but half a dozen farmers in a neighborhood combine to allow higher wages to their laborers than are common, and a sufficient quantity of any of the pleasant and wholesome liquors I have recommended, and they may soon, by their example, abolish the practice of giving them spirits. In a little while they will be delighted with the good effects of their association. Their grain and hay will be gathered into their barns in less time, and in a better condition than formerly, and of course at less expense. And 100 disagreeable scenes from sickness, contention, and accidents will be avoided, all of which follow in a greater or less degree the use of ardent spirits. Nearly all diseases have their predisposing causes. The same thing may be said of the intemperate use of distilled spirits. It will therefore be useful to point out the different employments, situations, and conditions of the body and mind, which predispose to the love of those liquors, and to accompany them with directions to prevent persons being ignorantly and undesignedly seduced into the habitual and destructive use of them. 1. Laborers bear with great difficulty long intervals between their meals. To enable them to support the waste of their strength, their stomach should be constantly but moderately stimulated by aliment, and this is best done by their eating 4 or 5 times in a day during the seasons of great bodily exertion. The food at this time should be solid, consisting chiefly of salted meat. The vegetables used with it should possess some activity, or they should be made savory by a mixture of spices. Onions and garlic are of a most cordial nature. They composed a part of the diet which enabled the Israelites to endure, in a warm climate, the heavy tasks imposed upon them by their Egyptian masters, and they were eaten, Horace and Virgil tell us, by the Roman farmers, to repair the waste of their strength by the toils of harvest. There are likewise certain sweet substances which support the body under the pressure of labor. The Negroes in the West Indies become strong and even fat by drinking the juice of the sugar cane in the season of grinding it. The Jewish soldiers were invigorated by occasionally eating raisins and figs. A bread composed of wheat flour, molasses, and ginger, commonly called gingerbread, taken in small quantities during the day, is happily calculated to obviate the debility induced upon the body by constant labor. All these substances, whether of an animal or vegetable nature, lessen the desire as well as the necessity for cordial drinks and impart equable and durable strength to every part of the system. 2. Valetudinarians, especially those who are afflicted with diseases of the stomach and bowels, are very apt to seek relief from ardent spirits. Let such people be cautious how they make use of this dangerous remedy. I have known many men and women of excellent characters and principles who have been betrayed by occasional doses of gin and brandy into a love of those liquors, and have afterwards fallen sacrifices to their fatal effects. The different preparations of opium are much more safe and efficacious than distilled cordials of any kind in flatulent or spasmodic affections of the stomach and bowels. So great is the danger of contracting a love for distilled liquors by accustoming the stomach to their stimulus, that as few medicines as possible should be given in spirituous vehicles in chronic diseases. A physician of great eminence and uncommon worth, who died towards the close of the last century in London, in taking leave of a young physician of this city, who had finished his studies under his patronage, impressed this caution with peculiar force upon him, and lamented at the same time, in pathetic terms, that he had innocent Volpoli. 2Z lie made many sots by prescribing brandy and water in stomach complaints. It is difficult to tell how many persons have been destroyed by those physicians who have adopted Dr. Brown's indiscriminate practice in the use of stimulating remedies, the most popular of which is ardent spirits. But it is well known, several of them have died of intemperance in T.I. City since the year 1790. They were probably led to it by drinking brandy and water to relieve themselves from the frequent attacks of debility and indisposition to which the labors of a physician expose him, and for which rest, fasting, a gentle purge, or weak diluting drinks would have been safe and more certain cures. None of these remarks are intended to preclude the use of spirits in the low state of short, or what are called acute diseases, for in such cases they produce their effects too soon to create a habitual desire for them. Some people, from living in countries subject to intermitting fevers, endeavor to fortify themselves against them by taking 2 or 3 wine glasses, oi bitters made with spirits, every day. There is great danger of contracting habits of intemperance from this practice. Besides, this mode of preventing intermittence is far from being a certain one. A much better security against them is a teaspoonful of the Jesuit's bark taken every morning during the sickly season. If this safe and excellent medicine cannot be had, a gill or half a pint of a strong watery infusion of centaury, chamomile, wormwood or rue, mixed with a little of the calamus of our meadows, may be taken every morning with nearly the same advantage as the Jesuit's bark. Those persons who live in a sickly country, and cannot procure any of the preventives of autumnal fevers which have been mentioned, should avoid the morning and evening air, should kindle fires in their houses on damp days and in cool evenings throughout the whole summer, and put on winter clothes about the first week in September. The last part of these directions applies only to the inhabitants of the Middle States. 4. Men who follow professions which require constant exercise of the faculties of their minds are very apt to seek relief by the use of ardent spirits from the fatigue which succeeds great mental exertions. To such persons it may be a discovery to know that tea is a much better remedy for that purpose. By its grateful and gentle stimulus, it removes fatigue, restores the excitement of the mind, and invigorates the whole system. I am no advocate for the excessive use of tea. When taken too stroif, it is hurtful, especially to the female constitution. But when taken of a moderate degree of strength, and in moderate quantities, with sugar and cream or milk, I believe it is, in general, innoxious, and at all times to be preferred to ardent spirits as a cordial for studious men. The late Anthony Benezet, one of the most laborious schoolmasters I ever knew, informed me he had been prevented from the love of spirituous liquors by acquiring a love for tea in early life. 3 or 4 cups, taken in an afternoon, carried off the fatigue of a whole day's labor in his school. This worthy man lived to be 71 years of age, and died of an acute disease, with the full exercise of all the faculties of his mind. But the use of tea counteracts a desire for distilled spirits during great bodily duo, as well as mental exertions. Of this, Captain Forrest has furnished us with a recent and remarkable proof in his history of a voyage from Calcutta to the Marquis Archipelago. I have always observed, says this ingenious mariner, when sailors drink tea, it weans them from the thoughts of drinking strong liquors and pernicious grog, and with this they are soon contented. Not so with whatever will intoxicate, be it what it will. This has always been my remark. I therefore always encourage it, without their knowing why. 5 of tea. Women have sometimes been led to seek relief from what is called breeding sickness by the use of ardent spirits. A little gingerbread or biscuit, taken occasionally so as to prevent the stomach being empty, is a much better remedy for that disease. 6. Persons under the pressure of debt, disappointments in worldly pursuits, and guilt have sometimes sought to drown their sorrows in strong drink. The only radical cure for those evils is to be found in religion, but where its support is not resorted to, wine and opium should always be preferred to ardent spirits. They are far less injurious to the body and mind than spirits, and the habits of attachment to them are easily broken after time and repentance have removed the evils they were taken to relieve. 7. The sociable and imitative nature of man often disposes him to adopt the most odious and destructive practices from his companions. The French soldiers who conquered Holland in the year 1794 brought back with them the love and use of brandy, and thereby corrupted the inhabitants of several of the departments of France who had been previously distinguished for their temperate and sober manners. Many other facts might be mentioned to show how important it is to avoid the company of persons addicted to the use of ardent spirits. 8. Smoking and chewing tobacco, by rendering water and simple liquors insipid to the taste, dispose very much to the stronger stimulus of ardent spirits. The practice of smoking cigars has, in every part of our country, been more followed by a general use of brandy and water as a common drink, or especially by that class of citizens who have not been in the habit of drinking wine or malt liquors. The less, therefore, tobacco is used in the above ways, the better. 9. No man ever became suddenly a drunkard. J.T. is by gradually accustoming the taste and stomach to ardent spirits, in the forms of grog and toddy, that men have been led to love them in their more destructive mixtures, and in their simple state. Under the impression of this truth, were it possible for me to speak with a voice so loud as to be heard from the river St. Croix to the remotest shores of the Mississippi, which bound the territory of the United States, I would say, friends and fellow citizens, avoid the habitual use of those 2 seducing liquors, whether they be made with brandy, rum, gin, Jamaica spirits, whiskey, or what is called cherry bounce. It is true some men, by limiting the strength of those drinks, by measuring the spirit and water, have drunken them for many years, and even during a long life, without acquiring habits of intemperance or intoxication. But many more have been insensibly led, by drinking weak toddy and grog first at their meals, to take them for their constant drink, in the intervals of their meals, afterwards to take them of an increased strength before breakfast in the morning, and finally to destroy themselves by drinking undiluted spirits during every hour of the day and night. I am not singular in this remark. The consequences of drinking rum and water, or grog, as it is called, says Dr. Mosley, is that habit increases the desire of more spirits and decreases its effects. and there are very few grog drinkers who long survive the practice of debauching with it, without acquiring the odious nuisance of dram drinker's breath, and downright stupidity and impotency. To enforce the caution against the use of those two apparently innocent and popular liquors still further, I shall select one instance, from among many, to show the ordinary manner in which they beguile and destroy their votaries. A citizen of Philadelphia, once of a fair and sober character, drank toddy for many years, as his constant drink. From this he proceeded to drink grog. After a while, nothing would satisfy him but slings made of equal parts of rum and water, with a little sugar. From slings he advanced to raw rum, and from common rum to Jamaica spirits. Here he rested for a few months, but at length, finding even Jamaica spirits were not strong enough to warm his stomach, he made it a constant practice to throw a tablespoonful of ground pepper in each glass of his spirits, in order to use his own word. To take off their coldness, he soon after died a martyr to his intemperance. Ministers of the gospel of every denomination in the United States, aid me with all the weight you possess in society, from the dignity and usefulness of your sacred office, to save our fellow men from being destroyed by the great destroyer of their lives and souls. In order more successfully to effect this purpose, permit me to suggest to you to employ the same wise modes of instruction, which you use in your attempts to prevent their destruction by other vices. You expose the evils of covetousness in order to prevent theft. You point out the sinfulness of impure desires in order to prevent adultery, and you dissuade from anger and malice in order to prevent murder. In ardent spirits in 369, like denounce, by your preaching, conversation, and examples, the seducing influence of toddy and grog, when you aim to prevent all the crimes and miseries which are the offspring of strong drink. We have hitherto considered the effects of ardent spirits upon individuals, and the means of preventing them. I shall close this head of our inquiry by a few remarks on their effects upon the population and welfare of our country, and the means of obviating them. It is highly probable not less than 4,000 people die annually from the use of ardent spirits in the United States. Should they continue to exert this deadly influence upon our population, where will their evils terminate? This question may be answered by asking, where are all the Indian tribes whose numbers and arms formerly spread terror among their civilized neighbors? I answer in the words of the famous Mingo chief, the blood of many of them flows not in the veins of any human creature. They have perished not by pestilence nor war, but by a greater foe to human life than either of them, ardent spirits. The loss of 4,000 American citizens by the yellow fever in a single year awakened general sympathy, vaudeville, it 3A and terror, and called forth all the strength and ingenuity of laws to prevent its recurrence. Why is not the same zeal manifested in protecting our citizens from the more general and consuming ravages of distilled spirits? Should the customs of civilized life preserve our nation from extinction, and even from an increase of mortality by those liquors, they cannot prevent our country being governed by men chosen by intemperate and corrupted voters. From such legislators, the republic would soon be in danger. To avert this evil, let good men of every class unite and besiege the general and state governments with petitions to limit the number of taverns, to impose heavy duties upon ardent spirits, to inflict a mark of disgrace or temporary abridgment of some civil right upon every man convicted of drunkenness, and finally to secure the property of habitual drunkards, with the benefit of their families by placing it in the hands of trustees appointed for that purpose by a court of justice. To aid the operation of these laws, would it not be extremely useful for the rulers of the different denominations of Christian churches to unite and render the sale and consumption of ardent spirits a subject of ecclesiastical jurisdiction? The Methodists and Society of Friends have, for some time past, viewed them as contraband articles to the pure laws of the gospel, and have borne many public and private testimonies against making them the objects of commerce. Their success in this benevolent enterprise affords ample encouragement for all other religious societies to follow their example. An inquiry and see Part 3. We come now to the third part of this inquiry, that is, to mention the remedies for the evils which are brought on by the excessive use of distilled spirits. These remedies divide themselves into two kinds, such as are proper to cure a fit of drunkenness, and two such as are proper to prevent its recurrence and to destroy a desire for ardent spirits. I am aware that the efforts of science and humanity in applying their resources to the cure of a disease induced by an act of vice will meet with a cold reception from many people. But let such people remember the subjects of our remedies are their fellow creatures, and that the miseries brought upon human nature by its crimes are as much the objects of divine compassion, which we are bound to imitate, as the distresses which are brought upon men by the crimes of other people, or which they bring upon themselves by ignorance or accidents. Let us not, then, pass by the prostrate sufferer from strong drink, but administer to him the same relief we would afford to a fellow creature in a similar state from an accidental and innocent cause. 1. The first thing to be done to cure a fit of drunkenness is to open the collar, if in a man, and remove all tight ligatures from every other part of the body. The head and shoulders should at the same time be elevated, so as to favor a more feeble determination of the blood to the brain. 2. The contents of the stomach should be discharged by thrusting a feather down the throat. It often restores the patient immediately to his senses and feet, should it fail of exciting a puking. 3. A napkin should be wrapped round the head and wetted for an hour or two with cold water, or cold water should be poured in a stream upon the head. In the latter way I have sometimes seen it used when a boy in the city of Philadelphia. It was applied by dragging the patient, when found drunk in the street, to a pump and pumping water upon his head for 10 or 15 minutes. The patient generally rose and walked off, sober and sullen, after the use of this remedy. Other remedies, less common, but not less effectual for a fit of drunkenness, are 4. Plunging the whole body into cold water. A number of gentlemen who had drunken to intoxication on board a ship in the stream near Fell's Point at Baltimore, in consequence of their reeling in a small boat on their way to the shore in the evening, overset it and fell into the water. Several boats from the shore hurried to their relief. They were all picked up and went home, perfectly sober, to their families. 5. Terror. A number of young merchants who had drunken together in a compting house on James River above 30 years ago, until they were intoxicated, were carried away by a sudden rise of the river from an immense fall of rain. They floated several miles with the current in their litty cabin, half filled with water. An island in the river arrested it. When they reached the shore that saved their lives, they were all sober. It is probable terror assisted in the cure of the persons who fell into the water at Baltimore. 6. The excitement of a fit of anger. The late Dr. Witherspoon used to tell a story of a man in Scotland who was always cured of a fit of drunkenness by being made angry. The means chosen for that purpose was a singular one. It was talking against religion. 7. A severe whipping. This remedy acts by exciting a revulsion of the blood from the brain to the external parts of the body. 8. Profuse sweats. By means of this evacuation, nature sometimes cures a fit of drunkenness. Their good effects are obvious in laborers, whom quarts of spirits taken in a day will seldom intoxicate, while they sweat freely, if the patient be unable to swallow warm drinks in order to produce sweats. They may be excited by putting him in a warm bath, or wrapping his body in blankets under a floor, which should be placed half a dozen hot bricks, or bottles filled with hot water. Bleeding. This remedy should always be used when the former ones have been prescribed to no purpose, or where there is reason to fear from the long duration of the disease a material injury may be done to the brain. It is hardly necessary to add that each of the above remedies should be regulated by the grade of drunkenness and the greater or less degree in which the intellects are affected in it. The remedies which are proper to prevent the recurrence of fits of drunkenness and to destroy the desire for ardent spirits are religious, metaphysical, and medical. I shall briefly mention them. 1. Many hundred drunkards have been cured of their desire for ardent spirits by a practical belief in the doctrines of the Christian religion. Examples of the divine efficacy of Christianity for this purpose have lately occurred in many parts of the United States. 2. A sudden sense of the guilt contracted by drunkenness, and of its punishment in a future Vol I3B world. It once cured a gentleman in Philadelphia who, in a fit of drunkenness, attempted TQ murder a wife whom he loved. Upon being told of it when he was sober, he was so struck with the enormity of the crime he had nearly committed that he never tasted spirituous liquors afterwards. 3. A sudden sense of shame. Of the efficacy of this deep-seated principle in the human bosom in curing drunkenness, I shall relate 3 remarkable instances. A farmer in England who had been many years in the practice of coming home intoxicated from a market town one day observed appearances of rain while he was in market. His hay was cut and ready to be housed. To save it, he returned in haste to his farm before he had taken his customary dose of grog. Upon coming into his house, one of his children, a boy of 6 years old, ran to his mother. "Father is come home, and he is not drunk." The father, who heard this exclamation, was so severely rebuked by it that he suddenly became a sober man. A noted drunkard was once followed by a favorite goat to a tavern into which he was invited by his master and drenched with some of his liquor. The poor animal staggered home with his master, a good deal intoxicated. The next day he followed him to his accustomed tavern. When the goat came to the door, he paused. His master made signs to him to follow him into the house. The goat stood still. An attempt was made to thrust him into the tavern. He resisted, as if struck with the recollection of what he suffered from being intoxicated the night before. His master, Wada, so much affected by a sense of shame, in observing the conduct of his goat to be so much more rational than his own, that he ceased from that time to drink spirituous liquors. A gentleman in one of the southern states, who had nearly destroyed himself by strong drink, was remarkable for exhibiting the grossest marks of folly in his fits of intoxication. One evening, sitting in his parlor, he heard an uncommon noise in his kitchen. He went to the door and peeped through the keyhole, from whence he saw one of his negroes diverting his fellow servants by mimicking his master's gestures and conversation when he was drunk. The sight overwhelmed him with shame and distress, and instantly became the means of his reformation. 4. The association of the idea of ardent spirits with a painful or disagreeable impression upon some part of the body has sometimes cured the love of strong drink. I once tempted a Negro man, who was habitually fond of ardent spirits, to drink some nun which I placed in his way, and in which I had put a few grains of tartar emetic. The tartar sickened and puked him to such a degree that he supposed himself to be poisoned. I was much gratified, D.V. observing he could not bear the cisslet nor smell of spirits for 2 years afterwards. I heard of a man who was cured of the love of spirits by working off a puke by large draughts of brandy and water, and I know a gentleman who, in consequence of being affected with a rheumatism, when overcome with fatigue and exposure to the rain, has ever since loathed that liquor, only because it was accidentally associated in his memory with the recollection of the pain he suffered from his disease. This appealed to that operation of the human mind which obliges it to associate ideas, accidentally or otherwise combined, for the cure of vice is very ancient. It was resorted to by Moses when he compelled the children of Israel to drink the solution of the golden calf, which they had idolized, in water. This solution, if made, as it most probably was, by means of what is called hepar sulphurous, was extremely bitter and nauseous, and could never be recollected afterwards without bringing into equal detestation the sin which subjected them to the necessity of drinking it. Our knowledge of this principle of association upon the minds and conduct of men should lead us to destroy, by means of other impressions, the influence of all those circumstances with which the recollection and desire of spirits are combined. Some men drink only in the morning, some at noon, and some only at night. Some men drink only on a market day, some at one tavern only, and some only in one kind of company. Now by finding a new and interesting employment, or subject of conversation for drunkards at the usual times in which they have been accustomed to drink, and by restraining them by the same means from those places and companions which suggested to them the idea of ardent spirits, their habits of intemperance may be completely destroyed, In the same way, the periodical returns of appetite and a desire of sleep have been destroyed in 100 instances. The desire for strong drink differs from each of them in being of an artificial nature, and therefore not disposed to return after I pee and chased for a few weeks from the system. 5. The love of ardent spirits has sometimes been subdued by exciting a counter-passion in the mind. A citizen of Philadelphia had made many unsuccessful attempts to cure his wife of drunkenness. At length, despairing of her reformation, he purchased a hogshead of rum, and after tapping it, left the key in the door of the room in which it was placed, as if he had forgotten it. His design was to give his wife an opportunity of drinking herself to death. She suspected this to be his motive in what he had done, and suddenly left off drinking. Resentment here became the antidote to intemperance. 6. A diet consisting wholly of vegetables cured a physician in Maryland of drunkenness, probably by lessening that thirst, which is always more or less excited by animal food. 7. Blisters to the ankles, which were followed by an unusual degree of inflammation, once suspended the love of ardent spirits for 1 month in a lady in this city. The degrees of her intemperance may be conceived of when I add that her grocer's account for brandy alone amounted annually to 100 pounds Pennsylvania currency for several years. 8. A violent attack of an acute disease has sometimes destroyed a habit of drinking distilled liquors. I attended a notorious drunkard in the yellow fever in the year 1798, who recovered with the loss of his relish for spirits, which has, I believe, continued ever since. 9. A salivation has lately performed a cure of drunkenness in a person of Virginia. The new disease excited in the mouth and throat, while it rendered the action of the smallest quantity of spirits upon them painful, was happily calculated to destroy the disease in the stomach which prompts to drinking, as well as to render the recollection of them disagreeable by the laws of association formerly mentioned. 10. I have known an oath taken before a magistrate to drink no more spirits produce a perfect cure of drunkenness. It is sometimes cured in this way in Ireland. Persons who take oaths for this purpose are called affidavit men. 11. An advantage would probably arise from frequent representations being made to drunkards, not only of the certainty, but of the suddenness of death from habits of intemperance. I have heard of 2 persons being cured of the love of ardent spirits by seeing death suddenly induced by fits of intoxication, in the one case in a stranger, and in the other in an intimate friend. 12. It has been said that the disuse of spirits should be gradual, but my observations authorize me to say that persons who have been addicted to them should abstain from them suddenly and entirely. You taste not, handle not, touch not, should be inscribed upon every vessel that contains spirits, in the house of a man who wishes to be cured of habits of intemperance, to obviate for a while the debility which arises from the sudden abstraction of the stimulus of spirits, laudanum, or bitters infused in water, should be taken, and perhaps a larger quantity of beer or wine that is consistent with the strict rules of temperate living. By the temporary use of these substitutes for spirits, I have never known the transition to sober habits to be attended with any bad effects, but often with permanent health of body and peace of mind. On the duties of a physician and the methods of improving medicine accommodated to the present state of society and manners in the United States. Delivered in the University of Pennsylvania, February 7, 1789, at the conclusion of a course of lectures upon chemistry and the practice of physic, published at the request of the class, Observations, and C. Gentlemen, by delivering to you a few directions for the regulation of your future conduct and studies in the line of your profession, I shall first suggest the most probable means of establishing yourselves in business and of becoming acceptable to your patients and respectable in life. Secondly, I shall mention a few thoughts which have occurred to me on the mode to be pursued in the further prosecution of your studies and for the improvement of medicine. Permit me, in the first place, to recommend to such of you as intend to settle in the country, to establish yourselves as early as possible upon charms. My reasons for this advice are as follow. 1. It will reconcile the country people to the liberality and dignity of your profession. by showing them that you assume no superiority over them from your education, and that you intend to share with them in those toils, which were imposed upon man in consequence of the loss of his innocence. This will prevent envy and render you acceptable to your patients as men as well as physicians, too. By living on a farm, you may serve your country by promoting improvements in agriculture, chemistry, which is now an important branch of a medical education, and agriculture are closely allied to each other. Hence, some of the earliest useful books upon agriculture have been written by physicians. Witness the essays of Dr. Home of Edinburgh and of Dr. Hunter of Yorkshire in England. The business of a farm will furnish you with employment in the healthy seasons of the year, and thereby deliver you from the tedium vitas, or what is worse, from retreating to low or improper calm duties of a physician, 309 Panny. Perhaps one cause of the prevalence of dram or grog drinking with which country practitioners are sometimes charged is owing to their having no regular or profitable business to employ them in the intervals of their attendance upon their patients. 4. The resources of a farm will create such an independence as will enable you to practice with more dignity, and at the same time screen you from the trouble of performing unnecessary services to your patients. It will change the nature of the obligation between you and them. While money is the only means of your subsistence, your patients will feel that they are the channels of your daily bread. But while your farm furnishes you with the necessaries of life, your patients will feel more sensibly that the obligation is on their side for health and life. The exigencies and wants of a farm and stock and labor of all kinds will enable you to obtain from your patients a compensation for your services in those articles. They all possess them, and men part with that of which money is only the sign, much more readily than they do with money itself. 39 J. Observation, Tome 6. The resources of a farm will prevent your cherishing, for a moment, an impious wish for the prevalence of sickness in your neighborhood. A healthy season will enable you to add to the produce of your farm, while the rewards of an unhealthy season will enable you to repair the inconvenience or necessary absence from it. By these means, your pursuits will be marked by that variety and integrity in which true happiness is said to consist. 7. Let your farms be small, and let your principal attention be directed to grass and horticulture. These afford most amusement, require only moderate labor, and will interfere least with vore duties to your profession. 2. Avoid singularities of every kind in your manner, stress, and general conduct. Sir Isaac Newton, it is said, could not be distinguished in company by any peculiarity from a common well-bred gentleman. Singularity in anything is a substitute for such great or useful qualities as command respect, and hence we find it chiefly in little minds. The profane and indelicate combination of extravagant ideas, improperly called wit, and the formal and pompous manner, whether accompanied by a wig, a cane, or a ring, should be all exit-duties of a physician. 3 Section 1 avoided as incompatible with the simplicity of science and the real dignity of physic. There is more than one way of playing the quack. It is not necessary for this purpose that a man should advertise his skill or his cures, or that he should mount a phaeton and display his dexterity in operating to an ignorant and gaping multitude. A physician acts the same pale in a different way, who assumes the character of a madman or a brute in his manners, or who conceals his fallibility by an affected gravity and taciturnity in his intercourse with his patient. Both characters, like the quack, impose upon the public. It is true they deceive different ranks of people, but we must remember that there are 2 kinds of vulgar viz, the rich and the poor, and that the rich vulgar are often upon a footing with the poor in ignorance and credulity. 3. It has been objected to our profession that many eminent physicians have been unfriendly to Christianity. If this be true, I cannot help ascribing it in part to that neglect of public worship with which the duties of our profession are often incompatible. For it has been justly observed that the neglect of this religious and social duty generally produces a relaxation, thither in principles or morals. Let this fact lead you in setting out in business to acquire such habits of punctuality, ill visiting your patients, as shall not interfere with acts of public homage to the Supreme Being. Dr. Gregory has observed that a cold heart is the most frequent cause of deism. Where this occurs in a physician, it affords a presumption that he is deficient in humanity. But I cannot admit that infidelity is peculiar to our profession. On the contrary, I believe Christianity places among its friends more men of extensive abilities and learning in medicine than in any other secular employment. Stahl, Hoffman, Boerhaave, Sydenham, Haller, Fothergill were all Christians. These enlightened physicians were considered as the ornaments of the ages in which they lived, and posterity has justly ranked them among the greatest benefactors of mankind. Permit me to recommend to you a regard to all the interests of your country. The education of a physician gives him a peculiar insight in the principles of many useful arts, and the practice of physic favors his opportunities of doing good by diffusing knowledge of all kinds. It was in Rome, when medicine was practiced only by slaves, that physicians were condemned by their profession mutam exercere artem. But in modern times and in free governments, they should disdain an ignoble silence upon public subjects. The American Revolution has rescued physic from its former slavish rank in society. For the honor of our profession, it should be recorded that some of the most intelligent and useful characters, both in the cabinet and the field, during the late war have been physicians. The illustrious Dr. Fothergill opposed faction and tyranny, and took the lead in all public improvements in his native country, without suffering thereby the least diminution of that reputation. Or business, in which for 40 years he flourished almost without a rival in the city of London. Let me advise you in your visits to the sick, never to appear in a hurry, nor to talk of indifferent matters before you have made the necessary inquiries into the symptoms of your patient's disease. Avoid making light of any case. Respis finem should be the motto of every indisposition. There is scarcely a disease so trifling that has not directly or indirectly proved an outlet to human life. This consideration should make you anxious and punctual in your attendance upon every acute disease, and keep you from risking your reputation by an improper or hasty prognosis. Vol I 3.3. Do not condemn or oppose unnecessarily the simple prescriptions of your patients. Yield to them in matters of little consequence, but maintain an inflexible authority over them in matters that are essential to life. Preserve, upon all occasions, a composed or cheerful countenance in the room of your patients, and inspire as much hope of a recovery as you can, consistent with truth, especially in acute diseases. The extent of the influence of the will over the human body has not yet been fully ascertained. I reject the futile pretensions of Mr. Mesmer to the cure of diseases by what he has absurdly called animal magnetism, but I am willing to derive the same advantages from his deceptions, which the chemists have derived from the delusions of the alchemists. The facts which he has established clearly prove the influence of the imagination and will upon diseases. Let us avail ourselves of the handle which those faculties of the mind present to us in the strife between life and death. I have frequently prescribed remedies of doubtful efficacy in the critical stage of acute diseases, but never till I had worked up my patients into a confidence bordering upon certainty of their probable good effect. The success of this measure has much oftener answered than disappointed my expectations, and while my patients have commended the vomit, the purge, or the blister which was prescribed, I have been disposed to attribute their recovery to the vigorous concurrence of the will in the action of the medicine. Does the will beget insensibility to cold, heat, hunger, and danger? Does it suspend pain and raise the body above feeling the pangs of Indian tortures? Let us not then be surprised that it should enable the system to resolve a spasm, to open an obstruction, or to discharge an offending humor. I have only time to hint at this subject. Perhaps it would lead us, if we could trace it fully, to some very important discoveries in the cure of diseases. Permit me to advise you in your intercourse with your patients to attend to that principle in the human mind which constitutes the association of ideas. A chamber, a chair, a curtain, or even a cup all belong to the means of life or death, accordingly as they are associated with cheerful or distressing ideas in the mind of a patient. But this principle is of more immediate application in those chronic diseases which affect the mind. Nothing can be accomplished here till we produce a new association of ideas. For this purpose, a change of place and company are absolutely necessary. But we must sometimes proceed much further. I have heard of a gentleman in South Carolina who cured his fits of low spirits by changing his clothes. The remedy was a rational one. It produced at once a new train of ideas, and thus removed the paroxysm of his disease. X make it a rule never to be angry at anything a sick man says or does to you. Sickness often adds to the natural irritability of the temper. We are, therefore, to bear the reproaches of our patients with meekness and silence. It is folly to resent injuries at any time, but it is cowardice to resent an injury from a sick man, since from his weakness and dependence upon us, he is unable to contend with us upon equal terms. You will find it difficult to attach your patients to you by the obligations of friendship or gratitude. You will sometimes have the mortification of being deserted by those patients who owe most to your skill and humanity. This led Dr. Turner to advise physicians never to choose their friends from among their patients. But this advice can never be followed by a heart that has been taught to love true excellency wherever it finds. I would rather advise you to give the benevolent feelings of your hearts full scope, and to forget the unkind returns they will often meet with by giving to human nor terra tear. O Ken, avoid giving a patient over in an acute disease. It is impossible to tell in such cases where life ends and where death begins. Hundreds of patients have recovered who have been pronounced incurable, to the great disgrace of our profession. I know that the practice of predicting danger and death upon every occasion is sometimes made use of by physicians in order to enhance the credit of their prescriptions if their patients recover, and to secure a retreat from blame if they should die, but this mode of acting is mean and illiberal. It is not necessary that we should decide with confidence at any time upon the issue of a disease. To what for? A physician in sickness is always a welcome visitor in a family. Hence he is often solicited to partake of the usual sign of hospitality in this country, by taking the draught of some strong liquor, every time he enters into the house of a patient. Let me charge you to lay an early restraint upon yourselves by refusing to yield to this practice, especially in the forenoon. Many physicians have been innocently led by it into habits of drunkenness. You will be in the more danger of falling into this vice, from the great fatigue and inclemency of the weather to which you will be exposed in country practice. But you have been taught that strong drink offers only a temporary relief from those evils, and that it afterwards renders the body more sensible of them. 13. I shall now give some directions with respect to the method of charging for your services to your patients. When we consider the expense of a medical education, and the sacrifices a physician is obliged to make of ease, society, and even health, to his profession, and when we add to these the constant and painful anxiety which is connected with the important charge of the lives of our fellow creatures, and above all, the inestimable value of that blessing which is the object of his services, I hardly know how it is possible for a patient sufficiently and justly to reward his physician. But when we consider, on the other hand, that sickness deprives men of the means of acquiring money, that it increases all the expenses of living, and that high charges often drive patients from regular bred physicians to quacks, I say, when we attend to these considerations, we should make our charges as moderate as possible and conform them to the following state of things. Avoid measuring your services to your patients by scruples, drachms, and ounces. It is an illiberal mode of charging. On the contrary, let the number and time of your visits, the nature of your patient's disease, and his rank in his family or society determine the figures in your accounts. It is certainly just to charge more for curing an apoplexy than an intermitting fever. It is equally just to demand more for risking your life by visiting a patient in a contagious fever than for curing a pleurisy. You have likewise a right to be paid for your anxiety. Charge the same services, therefore, higher to the master or mistress of a family, or to an only son or daughter, who call forth all your feelings and industry, than to less important members of a family and of society. If a rich man demand more frequent visits than are necessary, and if he impose the restraints of keeping to hours, by calling in other physicians to consult with you, upon every trifling occasion, it will be just to make him pay accordingly for it. As this mode of charging is strictly agreeable to reason and equity, it seldom fails of according with the reason and sense of equity of our patients. Accounts made out upon these principles are seldom complained of by them. I shall only remark further upon this subject that the sooner you send in your accounts after your patients recover, the better. It is the duty of a physician to inform his patient of the amount of his obligation to him at least once a year. But there are times when a departure from this rule may be necessary. An unexpected misfortune in business and a variety of other accidents may deprive a patient of the money he had allotted to pay his physician. In this case, delicacy and humanity require that he should not know the amount of his debt to his physician till time had bettered his circumstance. I shall only add under this head that the poor of every description should be the objects of your peculiar care. Dr. Boerhaave used to say, they were his best patients because God was their paymaster. The first physicians that I have known have found the poor the steps by which they have ascended to business and reputation. Diseases among the lower class of people are generally simple, and exhibit to a physician the best cases of all epidemics, which cannot fail of adding to his ability of curing the complicated diseases of the rich and intemperate. There is an inseparable connection between a man's duty and his interest. Whenever you are called, therefore, to visit a poor patient, imagine you hear the voice of the Good Samaritan sounding in your ears. Take care of him, and I will repay thee. I come now to the second part of this address, which was to point out the best mode to be pursued in the further prosecution of your studies and the improvement of medicine. Give me leave to recommend to you to open all the dead bodies you can without doing violence to the feelings of your patients or the prejudices of the common people. Preserve a register of the weather and of its influence upon the vegetable productions of the year. Above all, record the epidemics of every season, their times of appearing and disappearing, and the connection of the weather with each of them. Such records, if published, will be useful to foreigners and a treasure to posterity. Preserve likewise an account of chronic cases. Record the name, age, and occupation of your patient. Describe his disease accurately and the changes produced in it by your remedies. Mention the doses of EV medicine you administer to him. It is impossible to tell how much improvement in facility and practice you will find from following these directions. It has been remarked that physicians seldom remember more than the 2 or 3 last years of their practice. The records which have been mentioned will supply this deficiency of memory, especially in that advanced stage of life when the advice of physicians is supposed to be most valuable. Permit me to recommend to you further the study of the anatomy, if I may be allowed the expression, of the human mind, commonly called metaphysics. The reciprocal influence of the body and mind upon each other can only be ascertained by an accurate knowledge of the faculties of the mind, and of their various modes of combination and action. It is the duty of physicians to assert their prerogative and to rescue the mental science from the usurpations of schoolmen and divines. It can only be perfected by the aid and discoveries of medicine. The authors I would recommend to you upon metaphysics are Butler, Locke, Hartley, Reed, and Beattie. These ingenious writers have cleared this sublime science of its technical rubbish and rendered it both intelligible and useful. Let me remind you that improvement in medicine is not to be derived only from colleges and universities. Systems of physic are the productions of men of genius and learning, but those facts which constitute real knowledge are to be met with in every walk of life. Remember how many of our most useful remedies have been discovered by quacks. Do not be afraid, therefore, of conversing with them and of profiting by their ignorance and temerity in the practice of physic. Medicine has its Pharisees as well as religion, but the spirit of this sect is as unfriendly to the advancement of medicine as it is to Christian charity. By conversing with quacks, we may convey instruction to them, and thereby lessen the mischief they might otherwise do to society. But further, in the pursuit of medical knowledge, let me advise you to converse with nurses and old women. They will often suggest facts in the history and cure of diseases which have escaped the most sagacious observers of nature. Even Negroes and Indians have sometimes stumbled upon discoveries in medicine. Be not ashamed to inquire into them. There is yet one more means of information in medicine which should not be neglected, and that is to converse with persons who have recovered from indispositions without the aid of physicians. Examine the strength and exertions of nature in these cases, and mark the plain and homemade remedy to which they ascribe their recovery. I have found this to be a fruitful source of instruction, and have been led to conclude that if every man in a city or a district could be called upon to relate to persons appointed to receive and publish his narrative an exact account of the effects of those remedies which accident or whim has suggested to him, it would furnish a very useful book in medicine. To preserve the facts thus obtained, let me advise you to record them in a book to be kept for that purpose. There is one more advantage that will probably attend the inquiries that have been mentioned. You may discover diseases or symptoms of diseases, or even laws of the animal economy, which have no place in our systems of nosology, or in our theories of physic. RV study simplicity in the preparation of your medicines. Medicines, when mixed frequently, destroy the efficacy of each other. I do not include chemical medicines alone in this remark. It applies likewise to Gale-Nickel medicines. I do not say that all these medicines are impaired by mixture, but we can only determine when they are not by actual experiments and observations. 3. When medicines of the same class, or even of different classes, are given together, the strongest only produces an effect. But what are we to say to a compound of two medicines which give exactly the same impression to the system? Probably, if we are to judge from analogy, the effect of them will be such as would have been produced by neither in a simple state. For, by observing simplicity in your prescriptions, you will always have the command of a greater number of medicines of the same class, which may be used in succession to each other, in proportion as habit renders the system insensible of their action. 5. By using medicines in a simple state, you will obtain an exact knowledge of their virtues and doses, and thereby be able to decide upon the numerous and contradictory accounts which exist in our books of the character of the same medicines. Under this head, I cannot help adding 2 more directions. 1. Avoid sacrificing too much to the taste of your patients in the preparation of your medicines. The nature of a medicine may be wholly changed by being mixed with sweet substances. The author of nature seems to have had a design in rendering medicines unpalatable. Had they been more agreeable to the taste, they would probably have yielded long ago to the unbounded appetite of man, and by becoming articles of diet or condiments have lost their efficacy in diseases. 2. Give as few medicines as possible in tinctures made with distilled spirits. Perhaps there are few cases in which it is safe to exhibit medicines prepared in spirits. Many people have been innocently seduced into a love of strong drink from taking large or frequent doses of bitters infused in spirits. Let not our profession be reproached in a single instance with adding to the calamities that have been entailed upon mankind by this dreadful species of intemperance. Let me recommend to your particular attention the indigenous medicines of our country. Cultivate or prepare as many of them as possible, and endeavor to enlarge the materia medica by exploring the untrodden fields and forests of the United States. The ipecacuanha, the Seneca and Virginia snake roots, the Carolina pink root, the spicewood, the sassafras, the butternut, the thoroughwort, the poke, and the stramonium are but a small part of the medicinal productions of America. I have no doubt, but there are many hundred other plants which now exhale invaluable medicinal virtues in the desert air. Examine likewise the mineral waters, which are so various in their impregnation, and so common in all parts of our country. Let not the properties of the insects of America escape your investigation. We have already discovered among some of them a fly equal in its blistering qualities to the famous fly of Spain. Who knows? But it may be reserved for America to furnish the world from her productions with cures for some of those diseases which now elude the power of medicine. Who knows but that at the foot of the Allegheny Mountain there blooms a flower that is an infallible cure for the epilepsy. Perhaps on the Monongahela or the Potomac there may grow a root that shall supply, by its tonic powers, the invigorating effects of the savage or military life in the cure of consumptions. Human misery of every kind is evidently on the decline. Happiness, like truth, is a unit, while the world, from the progress of intellectual, moral, and political truth, is becoming a more safe and agreeable abode for man, the votaries of medicine should not be idle. All the doors and windows of the temple of nature have been thrown open by the convulsions of the late American Revolution. This is the time, therefore, to press upon her altars. We have already drawn from them discoveries in morals, philosophy, and government, all of which have human happiness for their object. Let us preserve the unity of truth and happiness by drawing from the same source, in the present critical moment, a knowledge of antidotes to those diseases which are supposed to be incurable. I have now, gentlemen, only to thank you for the attention with which you have honored the course of lectures which has been delivered to you, and to assure you that I shall be happy in rendering you all the services that lie in my power. In any way you are pleased to command me, accept of my best wishes for your happiness, and may the blessings of hundreds and thousands that were ready to perish be your portion in life, your comfort in death, and your reward in the world to come. An inquiry into the cause and cure of sore legs. An inquiry, and see however trifling these complaints might appear, they compose a large class of the diseases of a numerous body of people. Hitherto, the persons afflicted by them have been too generally abandoned to the care of empirics, either because the disease was considered as beneath the notice of physicians, or because they were unable to cure it. I would rather ascribe it to the latter than to the former cause, for pride has no natural fellowship with the profession of medicine. The difficulty of curing sore legs has been confessed by physicians in every country. As far as my observations have extended, I am disposed to ascribe this difficulty to the uniform and indiscriminate mode of treating them, occasioned by the want of a theory which shall explain their proximate cause. I shall attempt in a few pages to deliver one which, however imperfect, will, I hope, lay a foundation for more successful inquiries upon this subject hereafter. I shall begin my observations upon this disease by delivering and supporting the following propositions. Sore legs are induced by general debility. This I infer from the occupations and habits of the persons who are most subject to them. They are day laborers and sailors who are in the habit of lifting great weights, also washerwomen, and all other persons who pass the greatest part of their time upon their feet. The blood vessels and muscular fibers of the legs are thus overstretched, by which means either a rupture or such a languid action in the vessels is induced, as that an accidental wound from any cause, even from the scratch of a pin, or the bite of a mosquito, will not easily heal. But laborers, sailors, and washerwomen are not the only persons who are afflicted with sore legs. Hard drinkers of every rank and description are likewise subject to them. Where strong drink, labor, and standing long on the feet are united, they more certainly dispose to sore legs than when they act separately. In China, where the labor which is performed by brutes in other countries is performed by men, varices on the legs are very common among the laboring people. Perhaps the reason why the debility is induced in the legs produces varices instead of ulcers in these people may be owing to their not adding the debilitating stimulus of strong drink to that of excessive labor. It is not extraordinary that the debility produced by intemperance in drinking ardent spirits should appear first in the lower extremities. The debility produced by intemperance in the use of wine makes its first appearance in the form of gout in the same part of the body. The gout, it is true, discovers itself most frequently in pain only, but there are cases in which it has terminated in ulcers and even mortifications on the legs. Two sore legs are connected with a morbid state of the whole system. This I infer, one, from the causes which induce them, all of which act more or less upon every part of the body. Two, from their following or preceding diseases, which obviously belong to the whole system. Fevers and dysenteries often terminate critically in this disease, and the pulmonary consumption, apoplexy, have often been preceded by the suppression of a habitual discharge from a sore leg. The two latter diseases have been ascribed to the translation of a morbific matter to the lungs or brain, but it is more rational to ascribe them to a previous debility in those organs, by which means their vessels were more easily excited into action and effusion by the stimulus of the plethora induced upon the system in consequence of the confinement of the fluids formerly discharged from the leg in the form of pus. This plethora can do harm only where there is previous debility, for I maintain that the system, when the solids are exactly toned, will always relieve itself of a sudden preternatural accumulation of fluids by means of some natural emunctory. This has been often observed in the menorrhagia, which accompanies plentiful living in women, and in the copious discharges from the bowels and kidneys, which follow a suppression of the perspiration. 3. I infer it from their appearing almost universally in one disease, which is evidently a disease of the whole system, viz., the scurvy. 4. From their becoming, in some cases, the outlets of menstrual blood, which is discharged in consequence of a plethora, which affects more or less every part of the female system. 5. I infer it from the symptoms of sore legs, which are in some cases febrile, and affect the pulse in every part of the body with preternatural frequency or force. These symptoms were witnessed in an eminent degree in 2 of the patients who furnished subjects for clinical remarks in the Pennsylvania hospital some years ago. 6. I infer that sore legs are a disease of the whole system from the manner in which they are sometimes cured by nature and art. They often prove the outlets of many general diseases, and all the remedies which cure them act more or less upon the whole system. In all cases of sore legs, there is a tonic and atonic state of the whole system. The same state of excessive or weak, morbid action takes place in the parts which are affected by the sores. The remedies to cure them, therefore, should be general and local. In cases where the arterial system is affected by too much tone, the general remedies should be bloodletting. Of the efficacy of this rise medi in disposing ulcers suddenly to heal, the 2 clinical patients before mentioned exhibited remarkable proofs, in the presence of all the students of medicine in the university. The blood drawn was sizy in both cases. I have not the merit of having introduced this remedy into practice in the cure of ulcers. I learned it from Sir John Pringle. I have known it to be used with equal success in a sore breast, attended by pain and inflammation, after all the usual remedies in that disease had been used to no purpose. From 15 to 20 grains of this medicine should be given 3 times a day via a temperate diet, and a total abstinence from fermented and distilled liquors. Cool and pure air are best in a recumbent posture of the body. The local remedies in this state of the system should be cold water. Dr. Rigby has written largely in favor of this remedy when applied to local inflammations. From its good effects in allaying the inflammation which sometimes follows the puncture which is made in the arm in communicating the smallpox, and from the sudden relief it affords in the inflammatory state of the ophthalmia and in the pyle. No one can doubt of its efficacy in sore legs accompanied by inflammation in those vessels which are the immediate seat of the disease. 2 soft poultices of bread and milk, or of bread moistened with lead water. Dr. Underwood's method of making a poultice of bread and milk should be preferred in this case. He directs us first to boil the milk, then to powder the bread, and throw it into the milk, and after they have been intimately mixed, by being well stirred and boiled together, they should be poured out in D's spread upon a rag, and a knife dipped in sweet oil or lard should be run over them. The solidity and consistence of the poultice is hereby better preserved than when the oil or lard is mixed with the bread and milk over the fire. When the inflammation subsides, adhesive plaster is so applied as to draw the sound edges of the sores together. This remedy has been used vol I3G with great success by Dr. Physic in the Pennsylvania hospital and in his private practice. 5. Above all, rest and a horizontal posture of the leg. Too much cannot be said in favor of this remedy. In this species of sore legs, Nananani, the famous Italian surgeon, sums up the cure of sore legs in 3 words: tempo, riposo, e pazienza. That is, in time, rest and patience. A friend of mine who was cured by this surgeon of a sore leg many years ago informed me that he confined him to his bed during the greatest part of the time that he was under his care. In sore legs attended by too little general and local action, the following remedies are proper. It should be used plentifully, but with a constant reference to the state of the system, for the changes in the weather and other accidental circumstances often produce such changes in the system as to render its disuse for a short time frequently necessary. 2. Mercury. This remedy has been supposed to act by altering the fluids or by discharging a morbid matter from them and curing sore legs. But this is by no means the case. It appears to act as a universal stimulant, and if it prove most useful when it excites a salivation, it is only because in this way it excites the most general action in the system. 3. Mineral tonics, such as the different preparations of iron, copper, and zinc, for gentle exercise, rest, and a recumbent posture of the body, so proper in the tonic, are both hurtful in this species of sore legs. The efficacy of exercise, even of the active kind, in the cure of sore legs, accompanied by deficient action in the vessels, may easily be conceived from its good effects after gunshot wounds, which are mentioned by Dr. Jackson. He tells us that those British soldiers who had been wounded at the Battle of Guilford in North Carolina, who were turned out of the military hospitals and followed the army, soonest recovered of their wounds. It was remarkable that if they delayed only a few days on the road, their wounds grew worse, or ceased to heal. In the use of the different species of exercise, the same regard should be had to the state of the system, which has been recommended in other diseases. A nutritious and moderately stimulating diet, consisting of milk, saccharine vegetables, animal food, malt liquors, and wine. Wort has done great service in sore leers. The manner in which I have directed it to be prepared and taken is as follows. To 3 or 4 heaped tablespoonsful of the malt, finely powdered and sifted, add 2 tablespoonsful of brown sugar and 3 or 4 of Madeira, sherry or Lisbon wine, and a quart of boiling water. After they have stood a few hours, it may be drunken liberally by the patient, stirring it each time before he takes it, so that the whole substance of the malt may be conveyed into the stomach. A little lime juice may be added, if the patient requires it, to make it more plenty, may be taken once, twice, or 3 times a day at the pleasure of the patient, or according to the indication of his disease. This remedy is not only useful in easing the pain of a sore leg, but cooperates with other cordial medicines in invigorating the whole system. The local applications should consist of such substances as are gently escharotic, and which excite an action in the torpid vessels of the affected part. Arsenic, precipitate, and blue vitriol have all been employed with success for this purpose. Dr. Griffiths informed me that he has frequently accomplished the same thing in the dispensary by applications of tartar emetic. They should all be used, if necessary, in succession to each other, for there is often the same idiosyncrasy in a sore leg to certain topical applications that there is in the stomach to certain aliments. After the use of these remedies, astringents and tonics should be applied, such as an infusion of Peruvian or white oak bark. The water in which the smiths extinguish their irons, lime water, bread dipped in a weak solution of green vitriol, so much commended by Dr. Underwood. Compresses wetted with brandy or ardent spirits of any kind, and above all the adhesive plasters formerly mentioned. Tight bandages are likewise highly proper here. The lace stocking has been much used. It is made of strong coarse linen. Dr. Underwood gives several good reasons for preferring a flannel roller to the linen stocking. It sets easier on the leg and yields to the swelling of the muscles in walking. In scorbutic sores on the legs, Navy surgeons have spoken in high terms of an application of a mixture of lime juice and molasses. Mr. Gillespie commends the use of lime or lemon juice alone and ascribes many cures to it in the British Navy during the late war, after every common application had been used to no purpose. It is of the utmost consequence in the treatment of sore legs to keep them clean by frequent dressings and washings. The success of old women is oftener derived from their great attention to cleanliness in the management of sore legs than to any specifics they possess which are unknown to physicians. When sore legs are kept from healing by affections of the bone, the treatment should be such as is recommended by practical writers on surgery. I shall conclude this inquiry by 4 observations which are naturally suggested by what has been delivered upon this disease. 1. If it has been proved that sore legs are connected with a morbid state of the whole system, is it not proper to inquire whether many other diseases, supposed to be local, are not in like manner connected with the whole system? And if sore legs have been cured by general remedies, is it not proper to use them more frequently in local diseases? 2. If there be two states of action in the arteries and sore legs, it becomes us to inquire whether the same opposite states of action do not take place in many diseases in which they are not suspected. It would be easy to prove that they exist in several other local diseases. 3. If the efficacy of the remedies for sore legs which have been mentioned depend upon their being accommodated exactly to the state of the arterial system, and if this system be liable to frequent changes, does it not become us to be more attentive to the state of the pulse in this disease than is commonly supposed to be necessary by physicians? 4. It has been a misfortune in medicine, as well as in other sciences, for men to ascribe effects to one cause, which should be ascribed to manvid. Hence diseases have been attributed exclusively to morbid affections of the fluids by some and of the muscles and nerves by others. Unfortunately, the morbid states of the arterial system and the influence of those states upon the brain, the nerves, the muscles, the lymphatics, the glands, the viscera, the alimentary canal, and the skin, as well as the reciprocal influence of the morbid states of each of those parts of the body upon the arteries and upon each other, have been too much neglected in most of our systems of physic. I consider the pathology of the arterial system as a mine. It was first discovered by Dr. Cullen. The man who attempts to explore it will probably impoverish himself by his researches, but the men who come after him will certainly obtain from it a treasure which cannot fail of adding greatly to the riches of medicine. An account of the state of the body and mind in old age, with observations on its diseases and their remedies. An account and see. Most of the facts which I shall deliver upon this subject are the result of observations made during the term of 5 years upon persons of both sexes who had passed the 80th year of their lives. I intended to have given a detail of the names, manner of life, occupations, and other circumstances of each of them, but upon a review of my notes, I found so great a sameness in the history of most of them that I despaired, by detailing them, of answering the intention which I have purposed in the following essay. I shall therefore only deliver the facts and principles which are the result of the inquiries and observations I have made upon this subject. I shall mention the circumstances which favor the attainment of longevity. 2. I shall mention the phenomena of body and mind which attend it. And 3. I shall enumerate its peculiar diseases and the remedies which are most proper to remove or moderate them. The circumstances which favor longevity are: 1. Descent from long elfowed ant stores. I have not found a single instance of a person who has lived to be 80 years old, in whom this was not the case. In some instances I found the descent was only from one, but in general it was from both parents. The knowledge of this fact may serve not only to assist in calculating what are called the chances of lives, but it may be made useful to a physician. He may learn from it to cherish hopes of his patients in chronic and in some acute diseases in proportion to the capacity of life they have derived from their ancestors. Mother at 87, his father had 17 children by 2 wives. The doctor informed me that he once sat down as one of one adult sons and daughters at his father's table. In an excursion he once made to that part of England from whence his 2, temperance in eating and drinking. To this remark I found several exceptions. I met with one man of 84 years of age who had been intemperate in eating, and 4 or 5 persons who had been intemperate in drinking ardent spirits. They had all been day laborers, or had deferred drinking until they began to feel the languor of old age. I did not meet with a single person who had not, for the last 40 or 50 years of their lives, used tea, coffee, and bread and butter twice a day as part of their diet. I am disposed to believe that those articles of diet do not materially affect the duration of human life, although they evidently impair the strength of the system. The duration of life does not appear to depend so much upon the strength of the body or upon the quantity of its excitability as upon an exact accommodation of stimuli to each of them. A watch spring will last as long as an anchor, provided the forces which are capable of destroying both are always in an exact ratio to their strength. The use of tea and coffee in diet seems to be happily suited to the change which has taken place in the human body by sedentary occupations, by which means less family migrated to America. He discovered in a graveyard The tombstones of several persons of his name who had lived had to be very old. These persons he's supposed to have been his ancestors. Nourishment and stimulus are required then formally to support animal life. The modern exercise of the understanding. It has long been an established truth that literary men, other circumstances being equal, are longer lived than other people. But it is not necessary that the understanding should be employed upon philosophical subjects to produce this influence upon human life. Business, politics, and religion, which are the objects of attention of men of all classes, impart a vigor to the understanding, which, by being conveyed to every part of the body, tends to produce health and long life. Chapter 4. Equanimity of temper. The violent and irregular action of the passions tends to wear away the springs of life. Persons who live upon annuities in Europe have BTC observed to be longer lived in equal circumstances than other people. This is probably occasioned by their being exempted, by the certainty of their subsistence from those fears of want which so frequently distract the minds, and thereby weaken the bodies of old people. Life rents have been supposed to have the same influence in prolonging life. Perhaps the desire of life, in order to enjoy for as long a time as possible, that property which cannot be enjoyed a second time by a child or relation, may be another cause of the longevity of persons who live upon certain incomes. It is a fact that the desire of life is a very powerful stimulus in prolonging it, especially when that desire is supported by hope. This is obvious to physicians every day. Despair of recovery is the beginning of death in all diseases. But obvious and reasonable as the effects of equanimity of temper are upon human life, there are some exceptions in favor of passionate men and women having attained to a great age. The morbid stimulus of anger in these cases was probably obviated by less degrees or less active exercises of the understanding, or by the defect or weakness of some of the other stimuli, five emotions of life. Matrimony. In the course of my inquiries, I met with only one person beyond 80 years of age who had never been married. I met with several women who had borne from 10 to 20 children and suckled them all. I met with one woman, a native of Herefordshire, in England, who was in the 100th year of her age, who had borne a child at 60, menstruated till 80, and frequently suckled 2 of her children, though bomb in succession to each other. At the same time, she had passed the greatest part of her life over a washing tub. 6. Emigration. I have observed many instances of Europeans who have arrived in America in the decline of life, who have acquired fresh vigor from the impression of our climate, and of new objects upon their bodies and minds, and whose lives, in consequence thereof, appear to have been prolonged for many years. This influence of climate upon longevity is not confined to the United States. Of 100 European Spaniards who emigrate to South America in early life, 18 live to be above 50, whereas but 8 or 9 native Spaniards, and but 7 Indians of the same number exceed the 50th year of human life. 7. I have not found sedentary employments to prevent long life, where they are not accompanied by intemperance in eating or drinking. This observation is not confined to literary men, nor to women only, in whom longevity, without much exercise of body, has been frequently observed. I met with one instance of a weaver, a second of a silversmith, and a third of a shoemaker among Zerold age, 433 the number of old people, whose histories have suggested these observations. 8. I have not found that acute, nor that all chronic diseases shorten human life. Dr. Franklin had 2 successive vomikas in his lungs before he was 40 years old. I met with one man beyond 80 who had survived a most violent attack of the yellow fever, a second who had had several of his bones fractured by falls and in frays, and many who had been frequently affected by intermittent. I met with one man of 86 who had all his life been subject to syncope, another who had for 50 years been occasionally affected by a cough, and 2 instances of men who had been afflicted for 40 years with obstinate headaches. I met with only one person beyond 80 who had ever been affected by a disease in the stomach, and in him it arose from an occasional rupture. Mr. John Strangeways Hutton of this city, who died in 1793 in the 109th year of his age, informed me that he powder of dry Indian turnip and honey, Dr. Theory says that he did not find the itch or slight degrees of the leprosy to prevent longevity. Observations de physique et de médecine faites en different lieux de l'Espagne. Had never puked in his life. This circumstance is the more remarkable as he passed several years at sea when a young man. These facts may serve to extend our ideas of the importance of a healthy state of the stomach in the animal economy, and thereby to add to our knowledge in the prognosis of diseases and in the chances of human life. I have not found the loss of teeth to affect the duration of human life, so much as might be expected. Edward Drinker, who lived to be 103 in cider, he had a fixed dislike to spirits of all kinds. His appetite was good, and he ate plentifully during the last years of his life. He seldom drank anything between his meals. He was never intoxicated but twice in his life, and that was when a boy and at sea, where he remembers perfectly well to have celebrated by a feu de joie the birthday of Queen Anne. He was formerly afflicted with the headache and giddiness, but never had a fever except from the smallpox in the course of his life. His pulse was slow but regular. He had been twice married. By his first wife he had 8, and by his second 17 children. One of them lived to be 83 years of age. He was about 5 feet 9 inches in height, of a slender make, and carried an erect head to the last year of his life. Years old, lost his teeth 30 years before he died from drawing the hot smoke of tobacco into his mouth through a short pipe. Dr. Sayre of New Jersey, to whom I am indebted for several very valuable histories of old persons, mentions one man aged 81, whose teeth began to decay at 15, and another of 90, who lost his teeth 30 years before he saw him. The gums, by becoming hard, perform in part the office of teeth. But may not the gastric juice of the stomach, like the tears and urine, become acrid by age, and thereby supply by a more dissolving power the defect of mastication from the loss of teeth? Analogies might easily be adduced from several operations of nature, which go forward in the animal economy, which render this supposition highly probable. 10. I have not observed baldness or gray hairs occurring in earlier middle life to prevent old age. In one of the histories furnished me by Dr. Sayre, I find an account of a man of 81, whose hair began to assume a silver color when he was but 21 years of age. 11. More women live to be old than men, but more men live to be very old than women. I shall conclude this head by the following remark: notwithstanding there appears in the human body a certain capacity of long life, which seems to dispose it to preserve its existence in every situation. Yet this capacity does not always protect it from premature destruction. For among the old people whom I examined, I scarcely met with one who had not lost brothers or sisters in early and middle life, and who were born under circumstances equally favorable to longevity with themselves. 2. I now come to mention some of the phenomena of the body and mind which occur in old age. 1. There is a great sensibility to cold in all old people. I met with an old woman of 84 who slept constantly under 3 blankets and a coverlet during the hottest summer months. The servant of Prince de Beaufort, who came from Mount Jura to Paris at the age of 121 to pay his respects to the First National Assembly of France, shivered with cold in the middle of the dog days when he was not near a good fire. The National Assembly directed him to sit with his hat on in order to defend his head from the cold. 2 impressions made upon the ears of old people excite sensation and reflection much quicker than when they are made upon their eyes. Mr. Hutton informed me that he had frequently met his sons in the street without knowing them, until they had spoken to him. Dr. Franklin informed me that he recognized his friends after a long absence from them, first by their voice. This fact does not contradict the common opinion upon the subject of memory, for the recollection in these instances is the effect of what is called reminiscence, which differs from memory in being excited only by the renewal of the impression which at first produced the idea which is revived. 3. The appetite for food is generally increased in old age. The famous Parr, who died at 152, ate heartily in the last week of his life. The kindness of nature in providing this last portion of earthly enjoyments for old people deserves to be noticed. It is remarkable that they have, like children, a frequent recurrence of appetite, and sustain with great uneasiness the intervals of regular meals. The observation, therefore, made by Hippocrates that middle-aged people are more affected by abstinence than those who are old is not true. This might easily be proved by many appeals to the records of medicine, but old people differ from children in preferring solid to liquid aliment. From inattention to this fact, Dr. Mead has done great mischief by advising old people, as their teeth decayed or perished, to lessen the quantity of their solid and to increase the quantity of their liquid food. This advice is contrary to nature and experience, and I have heard of 2 old persons who destroyed themselves by following it. The circulation of the blood is supported in old people chiefly by the stimulus of aliment. The action of liquids of all kinds upon the system is weak, and of short continuance compared with the durable stimulus of solid food. There is a gradation in the action of this food upon the body. Animal matters are preferred to vegetable, the fat of meat to the lean, and salted meat to fresh by most old people. I have met with but few old people who retained an appetite for milk. It is remarkable that a less quantity of strong drink produces intoxication in old people than in persons in the middle of life. This depends upon the recurrence of the same state of the system with respect to excitability which takes place in childhood. Many old people, from an ignorance of this fact, have made shipwreck of characters which have commanded respect in every previous stage of their lives. From the same recurrence of the excitability of childhood in their systems, they commonly drink their tea and coffee much weaker than in early or middle life.